You enter a chamber that refuses to say what it is. There are senators on curule chairs, lictors at a respectful distance, secretaries with wax tablets catching every syllable like fishermen with fine nets. In the center sits a man who insists he is only first among equals, Princeps Senatus, the first senator, or simply Princeps, the first citizen. He declines the language of kings, because Romans sent kings packing centuries ago, but every door in the building opens when he moves. You feel the temperature change around him. Authority, here, is a climate. He begins with courtesy. Conscript fathers, he says, an old address that tastes of the Republic. Your counsel is requested. It's an invitation that functions like a lever. The Senate debates, proposes, even objects when the script allows. But you can tell the decision has a place to land, and it is the seat you are looking at. This is the Principate, a political costume that lets a monarchy walk around in a republican city without starting a riot. The mask is not a lie, exactly. It is an etiquette. An etiquette, as you soon learn, is a kind of law. How do you build a monarchy that refuses to say monarchy? You stack powers until they look like a single shape. The man at the center holds imperium, command, greater than any governor's, maius, which means his orders travel farther and arrive louder. He also holds tribunician power, tribunicia potestas, without sitting on the plebeian bench, the right to convene, to propose, to veto, to be sacrosanct in person. Ad Pontifex Maximus, high priest, and the rituals that once delayed votes now announce decisions. The crowd hears no crown jingle. It hears a sentence with many clauses and one subject. He smiles carefully when acclamation swells. Imperator, because emperors are born partly from the cheers of soldiers. You notice the grammar. Imperator here is not just general who won a battle. It is a name. Triumphs still parade, but their arches now remember a person, not a rotating office. The Senate votes honors. Augustus, Pater Patri, laurel on the doorframe, a curule chair in polished ivory, so that obedience can dress as gratitude. A man could drown in these adjectives and call it modesty. Mainstream fact checks your senses. In 27 BC, Augustus returns powers to the Senate, receives back the provinces that need legions, and keeps imperium maius over them. In 23 BC, he takes tribunician power for life, which renews annually on paper like a birthday you don't argue with. Later emperors inherit this stack as a starter kit. The Senate remains. Consuls still give their names to years. Elections occur, sometimes delightfully messy. Yet commands, coinage, portraits, and the appointment of governors flow from the same hand. You begin to recognize the regime by its verbs: centralize, standardize, pacify. The room's choreography helps. Senators speak in turn. The dignified octoritas of the great houses still matters for legitimacy, and the emperor replies with a moderation that feels rehearsed. Disagree, and he praises your frankness in public while assigning your cousin to a chilly provincial audit. Agree too eagerly, and he lifts an eyebrow that says, I prefer honest mirrors to polished ones. The Senate's advisory decrees, Senatus Consulta, still circulate. They are the formal clothing of decisions already warmed in the Imperial Council next door. Dignity as policy. It keeps old men seated and young men ambitious. You watch him handle petitions. A city asks for tax relief after a flood. A governor requests clarification about interest caps. A soldier seeks citizenship for a saved life. Imperial rescripts, written replies, resolve them with an air of tidy precedent. A jurist at his elbow shapes language that will be copied across provinces until people quote it as if it were obvious. Law, you realize, is how monarchy holds itself accountable to its own memory. Then the personnel file opens. Equestrian prefects, not senators, manage nerves that are too close to the throne to entrust to rivals. The grain supply, the city watch, the Praetorian Guard, Egypt. Procurators in crisp cloaks count the coins that pay for peace and panthers. Secretaries, a bipistulus, a libellus, a rationibus, build a paperwork spine that runs from the Palatine to the furthest milestone. If the emperor is the mind, this is the nervous system, and you can feel how swiftly a finger twitch becomes a policy at the edge of the map. Quirky tidbit. The emperor's seal impression might show a Capricorn or a Sphinx, and that little emblem can hurry a letter through a dozen relay stations faster than any threat. Couriers of the cursus publicus swap meals with a ritual as solemn as prayer. An ill-placed wax stamp can delay a governor's nap by a fortnight. In an empire of distances, logos outrun lictors. You note the theater, too. Coins shave the emperor's jawline until it is a virtue. Altars translate victory into peace. Ceremonies teach the city to clap on cue. When he enters the theater, the crowd rises, once for actors, twice for the princeps, and the distinction matters to people who collect distinctions as hobbies. Propaganda here is not screaming, it is repetition in stone and silver. The same face, the same abbreviations, TRP, COS, PP, until even a child at a crossroads can parse a regime by initials. Under the polish, there is steel. The Praetorian Guard lounges near enough to be a rumor and firm enough to be grammar. Its prefect can become a prime minister when emperors prefer hunting to paperwork, or a kingmaker when succession forgets to write a will. Camps outside the city keep legions busy on rivers where boredom breeds poetry instead of coups, but the presence of 10,000 elite soldiers within a day's walk of the Forum reminds every speech that adjectives have consequences. Historians still argue whether the Principate is a clever restoration or a velvet coup. Some say Augustus stitched the Republic back together with modern thread. Others say he embalmed it beautifully and called the result sleeping. They debate how much the Senate mattered, honors exchanged for obedience, or genuine consultation, and whether bureaucratic growth was a symptom of monarchy or the cure for distance. The argument lives in inscriptions and in the tone of later writers. Tacitus cooled disapproval, Suetonius gossip, Pliny's well-placed compliments. You filed their voices in a mental cabinet marked useful dissent. For now, what you feel is choreography that works. Provincial governors know they will be audited. City councils know largesse buys prestige. Soldiers know paydays have a schedule. Petitioners know the correct doorway and the correct words. The emperor is visible enough to reassure, invisible enough to let institutions pretend they run themselves. When he is good, the machine hums like a bathhouse at the second hour, steam, chatter, and no surprises. When he is bad, the same machine turns precautions into paranoia. The Praetorians' sandals sound louder. The Senate's adjectives grow brittle. You linger as the session ends. Senators move in knots, rehearsing gratitude. Scribes stack tablets. A prefect murmurs about grain ships and headwinds. The emperor rises last, because last implies gravity, and gravity is half his job. He offers a phrase that could be policy or proverb. We must be old-fashioned in the right ways, and leaves through a door painted with the gods of hearth and state embracing like cousins forced to share a holiday. Outside, the city translates politics into normal life. A baker consults a tariff. A veteran shows his discharge diploma to a clerk who likes to read names aloud. A child traces SPQR on a dusty milestone as if practicing for a future argument. You realize the mask and the hand are not enemies. The mask lets a proud people believe they still decide. The hand ensures that, most days, bread arrives and bridges hold. The trick, sustained over generations, turns emergency monarchy into habit. Empire is what happens when a costume becomes a skin and nobody minds the fit. You settle a little deeper into the Kuro cushion you definitely didn't earn, and watch the center of the room rearrange itself to suit one man's verbs. We talked about the mask. Now you trace the stitching. The emperor's authority is not one crown. It's a bundle, like a set of keys on a ring that clinks softly every time he moves. Two keys matter most for day-to-day empire: Imperium Maius, the greater command, and Tribunitia Potestas, the tribunician power. Together, they do something subtle and ruthless. They let the princeps overrule a governor at 1,000 miles and a mob at 20 steps without ever saying, "Because I said so." He can still say, "Conscript fathers," and "fellow citizens," with a straight face, because in Rome the best commands arrive disguised as courtesies. Start with Imperium Maius. Regular Imperium is the legal energy that powers consuls and governors. Raise troops, give orders, make war, sign off on treaties, and scowl at people who forget to salute. Augustus discovered that if you make his imperium greater than everyone else's, it becomes universal solvent. A proconsul in Spain says, "Go left." The emperor says, "Go right." The Spain rock politely moves right. This doesn't mean Rome is micromanaged from a single desk, though some emperors tried, but it does mean lines of authority never get tangled beyond the reach of one hand. In practice, Imperium Maius also lets the emperor step into any provincial problem, like a guest conductor taking the baton, a mutiny in Mysia, a boundary squabble in Africa, a governor whose receipts smell enthusiastic. Imperium Maius lets the center hum a note that cancels the disharmony. You can see the appeal in the frontier snow. A governor with ordinary imperium frets about raid schedules and bridge timbers. The emperor, with the Maius version, schedules reinforcements by courier and tells the bridge timber to arrive already cut. Later, under emperors like Trajan, it is this authority that legitimizes personally led campaigns, Dacia, Arabia, Parthia, and rescues the constitution from the awkwardness of pretending a private citizen is directing 20 legions because the Senate happened to clap at the right time. Now the other key, Tribunitia Potestas. In the Republic, tribunes of the plebs were sacred watchmen with a veto that could freeze a consul mid-gesture. Augustus claimed the power, not the office. No plebeian bench, no tribune elections, just the toolkit: convene the people, propose laws, veto measures, protect citizens, and crucially, wrap his own body in legal Teflon, sacrosanctity. So striking him was not just illegal but sacrilegious. He begins this in 23 BC, and later emperors renew it annually like a birthday for power. Hence the endless coin legends TRPV, TRPX, counting tribunician years the way you count seasons of a show that refuses to be cancelled. Mainstream fact to stamp the ledger. Augustus held Imperium Maius proconsulare from 27 BC over imperial provinces and accepted Tribunitia Potestas for life from 23 BC. These two powers, stacked, renewed, and advertised, became the constitutional core every emperor thereafter either inherited peacefully or seized noisily. You can check almost any coin, The alphabet soup, IMP, TRP, COS, PP, isn't decoration. It's the resume the state reads to itself until it relaxes. Together, these powers pull off a legal magic trick. In the city, the tribunician cloak gives the emperor a civic voice: propose, veto, protect, convene. Outside the city, the mayor's command gives him a military voice: order, reassign, overrule, march. Woven, they let him speak in Rome and be obeyed at the Rhine, and speak at the Rhine and be applauded in Rome. The Senate still drafts decrees. Magistrates still wear robes that make them look like punctuation. But the sentence belongs to the man with the two keys. Watch him use the set without jangling it. A city in Asia petitions. Its temple roof failed and the treasury followed. Can they divert customs revenue for repairs? The emperor replies in a rescript, citing the lex that governs provincial finances, invoking his tribunician care for the people, and, almost offhand, reminding the governor that Imperium Maius expects the work finished before the rains. It lands as benevolence, operates as command, and reads like precedent. Jurists copy, governors comply. City councils put up a statue at the shipping gate that accidentally looks a lot like the sender of the letter. Now shift the light and look at Imperium Maius where it bites most over other holders of Imperium. In the Republic, you avoided dueling commands by sending fast letters and praying for good omens. Under the Principate, clash is resolved by definition. A proconsul does not debate the emperor. He receives instructions or receives a successor. Historians still argue whether this concentrated hierarchy was the only way to hold an empire of such reach or a graceful excuse for sidelining senatorial initiative. Optimists say, a single hand keeps borders from fraying and governors from freelancing. Pessimists say, the Senate forgot how to lead and learned how to think. You ask, sleepily curious, did emperors really veto laws the way Republican tribunes did? Less often than you'd expect. Because a whisper accomplishes what a veto dramatizes. If an edict proposes a showy municipal bill that will drain the grain fund, a letter appears the day before the vote praising prudence in times of plenty. The bill learns dignity by withdrawing. When hard pushes happen, price controls and famine, guardianship reforms, civic status for soldiers' children, the tribunician pen writes them and assemblies applaud as planned. The veto survives as the shadow that keeps foolishness cool. Quirky tidbit. When emperors celebrated renewal of tribunician power, some cities treated the date like a civic birthday. Public feasts, free wine ladled by officials trying not to spill on their togas, and a short speech about the care of the princeps. A poet somewhere joked that TRP stood for try rehearsing, people, after too many citizens forgot the chorus line. A censor fined the meter. The two keys also tune the music of succession. When a likely heir is adopted and presented to the world, he receives tribunician power as a kind of rehearsal license, sometimes with a slice of Imperium to command a frontier. Germanicus under Tiberius, Titus under Vespasian, Marcus under Antoninus Pius. Each case advertises continuity in abbreviations. The coins begin to show double dates. Inscriptions list two names with one set of powers, and provincial cities learn a new portrait. It's how the regime says, the calendar will not panic, but the instruments can screech. Under bad emperors, the tribunician shield becomes a wall against criticism. Maiesta's trials stretch, insult, like taffy, and Imperium Maius turns policy into whim with spears attached. Under Caligula, the tribune's body is sacrosanct, but the mind inside it keeps surprising the schedule. Under Domitian, tribunician years count like drumbeats behind prosecutions. Under Commodus, the shield slips off and becomes a toy. And yet the structure holds long enough that good emperors can still play in tune after the cacophony stops. Light joke 1. A governor writes that his river bridge collapsed. By act of the gods. The emperor replies, rebuild by act of the governor. A rescript later framed by the town with mixed feelings. Light joke 2. A centurion claims his men salute faster on the day the tribunician year renews. A clerk says they're racing the new paperwork. Light joke 3. A reader declares Imperium Maius an elegant solution. The audience wonders what the problem was and decides not to ask while the Praetorians are within earshot. There's also the matter of Egypt, the emperor's private puzzle box. Because Imperium Maius plus no senators allowed turns the Nile into a reservoir under one key, and the tribunician pose of caring for the people becomes grain ships that arrive exactly when patience runs out. Control of bread is not subtle, but the tribunician language makes it sound like love, cura anoni, care of the grain. Announce an arrival, lower prices, accept applause for peace. Its governance as weather forecast, sunny with shipments, majesty at normal levels, all breezes favorable. The jurists, smelling fresh parchment, turn all this into doctrine. Papinian, Ulpian, and the textbook voice of Gaius analyze imperium and tribunician octoritas the way naturalists classify birds. Which feathers mean what, how far a wing beats, how precedent breeds. Emperors answer petitions with formulae that become patterns. Patterns become legal expectations. And suddenly the monarchy is bound to its own best behavior by the written habits of yesterday. That is the hidden kindness of Imperium Maius and Tribunicia Potestas. They put the sovereign inside a narrative long enough that even he has to read along. Historians still argue whether the tribunician branding genuinely protected ordinary citizens in the city. Did the emperor act as an ombudsman in the old tribunate spirit? Or whether the protection language mostly shielded imperial dignity. We do have famous gestures, emperors opening their doors to petitions at dawn, punishing a centurion for caning a citizen, forbidding rough arrests in sacred precincts. We also have the other side, trials where insult to the princeps becomes the catch-all for unpopular opinions. The scale tips with the temperament of the man in the chair, which is why the bureaucracy keeps receipts like amulets. Stand up, stretch, the keys jingle again. You feel how the system invites good emperors to be efficient and bad emperors to be survivable. Imperium Maius keeps borders and governors aligned with a single timeline. Tribunicia Potestas keeps city politics framed in rhetoric citizens recognize as their own. A governor in Syria knows which signature ends arguments. A baker in Trastevere knows which initials on a notice mean the price is not a suggestion. The Principate's silent boast is that it can talk like a republic while behaving like a well-run estate. If you listen carefully as the audience files out, you'll hear the practiced compliment that closes so many provincial decrees. To the emperor, guardian of laws and commander of peace. The two halves are the keys you watched. Law guarded by tribunician care, peace commanded by Imperium Maius. It sounds grand at noon. It sounds practical at midnight when a courier swaps mules at a relay stone because a rescript must reach a governor before his market opens. You leave the chamber into a corridor painted with grapevines and modest victories. Somewhere, a secretary counts TRP years on his fingers to make sure the coin die is correct. Somewhere, a frontier scout tucks a letter with an imperial seal inside his cloak and rides hard. The state is not a barked order. It's this: a set of powers arranged to make orders travel quickly and arrive politely. You grin and yawn, and let the rhythm do its sleepy work. You take the cool stone step into the curia and feel a paradox put its hand on your shoulder. This hall remembers when debate could derail armies. Now, debate oils a machine someone else already set humming. Yet it matters. The Senate is no longer the engine, but it is the dashboard. Dials that reassure, lights that warn, and numbers that the driver, sitting next door, chooses to look at because pride likes evidence. Listen to the choreography. A consul presides. Heralds call silence. Names are taken. The benches fill with broad purple stripes, laterclavia, and red-soled shoes. An imperial secretary reads an oratio principis, a written message from the emperor proposing a course, a provincial boundary adjustment, honors for a general, a new aqueduct's funding. Senators then give sententiae in order, once by seniority, now often by those the princeps nods to first. The ritual smells of republic, the outcome tastes of principate. Yet the words voted here harden into senatus consulta, advisory decrees that circulate to cities as if Jupiter himself had taken notes. Mainstream fact to fix the pillars. Under the Principate, the Senate retains formal control of senatorial provinces, notably Asia and Africa, allocates them by lot to ex-consuls or ex-praetors, grants triumphal ornaments, votes statues and supplications, and legislates by senatus consultum on matters that become real law in practice. Think the SC Velianum. Limits on women's suretyship, SC Macedonianum, protecting sons from creditors of their fathers, SC Selenianum, investigating slave involvement in a master's death, and the SC Claudianum, status of children of certain unions. The emperor dominates agenda setting, but senatorial text still runs courts and households from Gaul to Judea. Careers still climb through the cursus honorum. The Senate still polices its own membership. Now with imperial adlection, you can be added by favor, and an official property bar, about 1 million sesterces, that turns dignity into a balance sheet. You watch dignity operate like policy. Honors are the Senate's currency. A general receives ornamenta triumphalia, triumphal regalia without the parade, because real triumphs are now emperor-sized. A governor who balanced accounts earns a bronze statue in his provincial forum. By decree of the Senate, a poet is granted a public reading with benches moved closer to the orchestra. Each honor binds, reputation paid today purchases tomorrow's obedience. Even the emperor submits his victories to senatorial celebration. Arches inscribed Senatus Populus Romans remind the city that, officially, glory is a public asset on loan to a particular face. Quirky tidbit. Seating in theaters advertises hierarchies more stubborn than marble. Senators occupy the orchestra, equestrians the first 14 rows, everyone else the slope. A censor once tried moving a notorious time-waster to a higher bench to shorten his speeches. The usher, in a crisis of constitutionalism, refused to tidy with furniture. Another, the Senate's vote can proceed by acclamation. Ita est! So enthusiastically that scribes later ask each other whether they recorded clapping or consent. The emperor uses the chamber as mirror and megaphone. He consults on successions of client kings, on boundaries of colonies, on pardons that look nobler when shared. He lets the Senate try high-profile trials, particularly Maestas, treason, under Tiberius, so that verdicts can wear the toga of consensus. The Concilium Principis, an inner council of friends, jurists, and secretaries, drafts the melody. The Senate supplies harmony that ordinary ears will trust. When a scandal like the Piso Germanicus affair shakes the gossip columns, the SC de Pison pater emerges. A long decree that reads like law, theater, and therapy at once, ordering monuments, penalties, and crucially, a version of the story. Historians still argue whether this body was a rubber stamp with good penmanship, or a genuine partner whose octoritas constrained bad emperors and amplified good ones. Tacitus' acid suggests the former. The stubborn longevity of senatorial procedures suggests the latter. Under Claudius, for instance, the Senate hears an imperial speech advocating admission of Gallic nobles. The debate is preserved on bronze at Lyon. It is imperial policy, but it is also senatorial buy-in, and that buy-in makes policy stick from Brittany to the Bosporus. Membership, you notice, behaves like a garden, weeded, replanted, sometimes overwatered. Censors once revised the roll, now emperors, adlect, men into the Senate to replace the Civil War thinnings and to integrate Italian and provincial elites. The million sesterces property requirement pushes new senators to acquire land and perform largesse. The latus clavis arrives with obligations, attendance, public spending, and the unspoken rule that your ambition must rhyme with the princeps verse. Drop below the property line and you risk being noted. Rise too noisily and you risk being noticed. The Senate also runs parts of the empire, in miniature. Asia and Africa, rich and relatively pacified, are kept senatorial by design. No legions, on paper, short tenures, audits at return. Proconsuls write edicts, sit assizes, and send reports home that the Senate files and occasionally reads before the emperor reads them. The separation is both practical and psychological. It gives the old aristocracy a sandbox with real responsibilities and few spears, while the emperor keeps the border provinces where mistakes involve armies. Law blooms in these debates like ivy that knows which walls to climb. Jurists appear as senators or as imperial advisors whose opinions, responding to a senator's hypothetical, are later cited by name in faraway courts. A senatorial decree against loan sharking to soldiers' families will be quoted on papyrus in Egypt. A ruling about manumission ages will be scratched on a wax tablet in Spain. The Senate is no longer the only lawgiver, but it remains a lawwriter whose handwriting gets everywhere. Light joke 1. A new man rises to speak and thanks the emperor for restoring freedom of speech. A veteran senator leans over and whispers, "Use it carefully. Freedom dislikes being overworked." Light joke 2. During a long roll call, a board clerk bets he can predict each speech by the first adjective. He wins too often and is promoted to poetry. Light joke 3. A provincial envoy praises the Senate as the world's conscience. A praetor murmurs, "We also do calendars." Trials give you the Senate at its most dramatic and most dangerous. Under Tiberius, Maestas becomes a net that catches both genuine conspiracies and energetic flattery from delators, informers. Senators vote, sometimes bravely, sometimes fearfully. Outcomes oscillate with imperial weather. Under Nero, the chamber suffers and survives. Under Vespasian and Trajan, it breathes again, trying cases where provincial elites look to the purple stripes as guarantors that not everything is decided in the palace. The same hall that can applaud like a choir can also, on its best days, say "no" in Latin and make it a verb the emperor hears. Quirky tidbit: the Senate's formal minutes, Acta Senatus, were once published. Augustus stopped the practice to keep gossip from acquiring footnotes. Later emperors selectively leak or read from the acta to advertise consultation. Meanwhile, senatorial families maintain private memoirs of debates, ensuring that future historians will always have something to mistrust and quote. Careers still pivot here. A young senator angling for the quaestorship courts patrons on these benches. An ex-praetor watching the lot for Asia glance toward Fortuna's statue. A consul designate rehearses the motion he will propose to restore ancient virtue by modestly funding a new market roof. The emperor, by oration and nod, signals who is on the ladder. The Senate supplies the rungs. Refuse to climb, and you will be praised for stoic integrity and quietly starved of opportunities. Climb clumsily, and you will find yourself governing Sardinia in winter. Mainstream aside, tidy as a clerk's tally. Senatus consulta function as legislation. Senatorial provinces are Asia and Africa. Later others rotate briefly. Proconsular tenures run 1 year with audits. Property qualification for senators roughly 1 million sesterces. Admission by election fades, by adlectio rises. Senate confers honors, statues, ornamenta triumphalia, priesthoods, and hears high-profile cases. Emperors address the House via written orations, increasingly drafted by secretaries and jurists. The Acta Senatus are curated, not broadcast. Historians still argue the Senate's role in succession. Acclamation by troops could crown an emperor in the provinces, but the Senate's formal auctoritas, decreeing titles, confirming powers, made the difference between a strong man and a lawful princeps. Augustus understood this theater and rehearsed it excellently. Later aspirants learned the hard way that walking into the curia with swords invited short reigns. Even soldiers prefer their emperors wrapped in legal garments. Pay tastes better with precedent. You leave near sunset and notice the odd, comforting afterglow. Senators dispersing in groups, promising to dine and to disagree pleasantly. A Greek envoy practicing thank yous in Latin. A boy following his father, counting the steps to the rostra as if they are a ladder he will climb. The Senate did not survive the Republic by pretending nothing changed. It survived by making change speak Latin and sit down properly. Its dignity is not only costume, it is also glue, binding provinces to precedent, emperors to memory, and ambition to forms that make it predictable. The Principate needs that glue. A single will can move an empire, but 1,000 signatures make it last. When the Senate votes a statute or drafts a decree, it teaches the empire to believe that obedience is civic pride rather than personal fear. The emperor can command, the Senate can persuade. Between them, and between ritual and reality, the state remembers how to feel legitimate. You close the curia's heavy door and find the street calmer for it, as if a room full of adjectives had once again kept the nouns from fighting. You catch yourself smiling at 2 men in snowy togas as if they are captains of a ship that now runs on rails. Consuls, once the Republic's driving hands, still stride through Rome with lictors, fasces, and calendar privileges, but the wheel they grip has been bolted to the floor. Don't pity them yet. Prestige pays dividends in this city, and ceremony is a kind of currency. Besides, you'll need their names when you date your letters. Years here are still. The consulship of so-and-so, and what's his name? And the chancery would rather misfile your estate than your adjectives. Watch their mourning. The procession begins at the Palatine with 12 lictors for each. Outside the city the axes show. Inside they stay politely sheathed, then a turn through the forum where vendors pause, soldiers square shoulders, and children count rods like beads. The pair mount the rostra to announce the edictum consularis, court days, market protections, the month-by-month rhythm of public business. It's a recital that smells of old authority and new caution. Everyone knows that real strategy hums next door in the Imperial Council. Everyone also knows that a city works best when its rituals are respected in public and adjusted in private. Mainstream fact for the ledger. Under the Principate, 2 consuls are still elected annually, first by the people, later effectively by imperial nomination, give their names to the year, preside over the Senate and public games, manage certain judicial functions, and conduct the formalities of taking auspices and inaugurating the calendar. A growing number of suffecti, replacement consuls, rotate into office mid-year so the emperor can reward more men with the title. By the 1st and 2nd centuries CE, a single year might see several pairs. The consulate becomes a prestigious milestone rather than a cockpit. You notice how the emperor respects the costume. He often begins the year as consul ordinarius himself or grants it to heirs apparent, advertising succession with ink rather than speeches. Trajan takes it to honor victories. Hadrian bestows it sparingly to polish loyalty. The message lands where it must. The consulship is now part laurel, part handshake, a visible knot in the web that ties great houses to the center. It's also a practical training day. Consuls still chair the Senate, shepherd votes, and broker compromises that read as senatorial initiative even when drafted in the palace. The law gives them decent verbs. In criminal matters within the city, consuls can convene a quaestio or transfer a tricky case to the Senate. In administration, they issue edicts on procedure and public order. They wear the toga praetexta, sit on curule chairs, and keep an eye on the calendar's fasti so festivals don't crash into court days like ox carts at a narrow gate. They also preside at rites, opening the year with vows for the emperor's safety, vota pro salute principis, dedicating altars, and tossing the right handful of grain to tell the gods that Rome still remembers which end of the ritual to light. Quirky tidbit: the consul's official pen, stylus, signs the album senatorium, the public list of sitting senators posted in the forum. On unveiling days, young aristocrats circle it like poets around a new statue, hunting their family names with the same mixture of dread and delight you reserve for tax notices. Another, on the calends of January, the consuls throw sportually, little money gifts, to the crowd. Romans call it generosity, accountants call it marketing, and boys in the Subura call it aim for the heavy ones. The Senate uses consuls as conductors. They solicit sententiae, assign speaking order, and cloak imperial proposals in the wool of deliberation. A skilled consul can soften a harsh measure with a kindly preface, or bury a bad idea in committees until it forgets what it wanted. A dull consul learns that the house runs itself with the emperor's oratio as sheet music. Either way, business appears to flow through the ancient valves, and appearances keep tempers quiet. Remember our section about dignity as policy? The consul is one of dignity's hands. You follow one out of Rome and see where the steering wheel used to matter. In the Republic, consuls march to war. Under the Principate, that honor belongs mostly to the emperor or to imperial legates with sharper mandates. Consuls might still command in special cases, Germanicus in Germany as consul, or a prince of the blood leading a showy expedition, but the normal rhythm parks them in Rome. Sometimes, after their term, they receive a province, senatorial or imperial, where they will discover that audits now bite harder than eagles and that Imperium Maius can overrule them by return courier. The year in Rome is thus both crown and waiting room. Historians still argue whether this taming saved the state or merely embalmed its vigor. Did turning the consulship into a rotary honor preserve senatorial pride while freeing policy from annual whiplash? Or did it sideline the class whose ambition once supplied creative energy? Optimists point to calmer succession politics, fewer calendar crises, and better continuity in provincial administration. Pessimists point to sycophancy, an eroded sense of responsibility, and the occasional consul who mistook announcing games for governing. The debate feels like two old men politely arguing about whether a clock is more alive than an hourglass. Light joke 1. A wit claims that consuls are like the city's doormen, uniformed, dignified, very good at opening doors someone else has decided on. A doorman sues for defamation and wins complimentary seats at the next games. The consul presides and claps dutifully. Light joke 2. When a senator complains that suffect consuls change too fast to remember their names, a clerk says that's why we carve them in stone. Light joke 3. A young novice homo brags that he will reform the calendar when he is consul, and Edile reminds him the calendar bites. Ceremony, though, is not empty. On New Year's Day, the pomperoles, sacrificial bulls, flute players, the vestals, and the consuls processing to the capital to vow for the emperor's safety and Rome's prosperity. The city breathes easier afterward, as if a collective muscle unclenched. Even skeptics enjoy the smell of roasted offerings and the promise that the grain fleet has left Alexandria. The consul's voice pronounces auspices favorable, auspiciata, and suddenly 1,000 clerks know which ledgers to open first. Ritual is the empire's operating system. Consuls keep it booting. They also sit where politics still happens in the open. During a famine, the consul field manages panic. Prices posted, riots tamped, a senatorial decree crafted that praises the princeps cura annoni while authorizing special measures. During an epidemic, he announces closures in a voice that sounds like continuity rather than crisis. During a succession hint, say, the adoption of an heir, he reads the emperor's letter in the curia with a dignity calibrated to reassure men who have lived through noisier transitions. Your earlier memory of Sulla's swords in the Forum makes you appreciate how much calmer a controlled consulship feels on the skin. The career logic still runs through this office. To be consul ordinarius places your name on all the city's inscriptions for that year. It is the brightest line on a resume a tomb will later brag about. To be suffectus is still gold, just thinner leaf. Patronage networks flex here. Emperors reward generals, jurists, or financiers who serve the common good, or the uncommon emergency. Provincial elites with Roman citizenship sometimes make it all the way to the chair. Claudius' speech at Lyon told you this would happen, and the bronze remembers it did. In a world where the emperor must keep aristocrats interested without letting them dangerous, the consulship is a brilliant bribe. Quirky tidbit 2. Consuls sponsor games whose program notes outlast the elephants. Inscriptions list the number of pairs of gladiators, shrinking under more scrupulous emperors, the exotic beasts, import licenses as much as animals, and the awnings that kept senators shaded, engineers applauded quietly. A frugal consul who skimps earns lampoons in chalk on the circus wall. A lavish one earns debts and a reputation his creditors will carefully admire. When trouble comes, the limits show. In the rare case of urban unrest that stretches beyond theater scuffles, Think the Neronian fire's aftermath, or the riot-prone days in the Flavian amphitheater. The consuls coordinate with the praefectus urbi and the vigiles. But no one expects a Cincinnatus routine. The praetorian prefect informs as much as he asks. Imperial rescripts arrive quickly. The consuls wrap orders in senatorial phrasing so obedience feels traditional. A visitor from the Republic might purse his lips. A shopkeeper from Trastevere thanks the gods someone answers the night watch whistle without asking the comitia. Historians still argue whether the year-by-year churn of suffect consuls diluted elite cohesion or distributed prestige more evenly. Some see a clever safety valve. Too many talented and proud men? Issue more consulships, shorter tenures, wider smiles. Others see a title whose inflation made true authority harder to locate outside the palace. The evidence lies in careers. Plenty of ex-consuls become effective provincial governors, jurists, or urban prefects. A few become footnotes crushed under their own statues. Before dusk, the pair you watched in the morning preside over an adoption ceremony in the Forum of Augustus. There's laurel in the air, marble glowing, and the comfortable murmur of a city that recognizes its own choreography. The consuls read the formal language. The Senate acclaims. A herald's long voice dances off the colonnade. You notice how seamlessly this ritual plugs into the machine you've been tracing. Tribunician cloak, imperium maius, senatorial dignity, equestrian administrators, praetorian shadow. The consuls don't steer, but they keep the dashboard lit, the horn moderate, and the passengers calmed out. On your way home you pass a milestone chiseled with the names of this year's consuls. A boy traces the letters with a finger, sounding them out, practicing the habit that keeps this empire's time. You catch a whiff of bread, hear the clip of hooves from a postal relay, and realize that for most people the difference between a steering wheel and a polished handle is academic. The door opens when someone pushes. The name above it tells you whom to thank. In a world that learned the cost of improvised politics, that gratitude is worth exactly a year, renewable, as always, with ceremony. You slip out of the curious marbled echo into corridors where authority changes shoes. The senatorial world strides in red-soled calcii. Here, the leather is plainer, the pace quicker, and the conversations sound like logistics. This is the equestrian order's floor, prefects and procurators, the empire's career administrators, men whose power is measured in receipts and routes rather than in ancestral masks. If the emperor runs the melody and the senate supplies harmony, equestrians keep time. Without them, the music would drift, and you would notice when your bread didn't. Start with the grain, because everyone does. The praefectus Anoni, an equestrian post, watches the Nile like a nervous astronomer. He calculates harvests, contracts ships, schedules convoys, polices hoarders, and speaks to dockmasters as if they are tempers he must soothe. When storms trap grain off Puteoli, he is the man with the authority to open emergency stores and the pen to issue price edicts. He collaborates with another equestrian, the praefectus Aegypti, the governor of Egypt, where no senator is allowed to graze ambition. Between them, ships move like arguments that have already won, sailing under imperial seal, exempt from some taxes, defended by the navy, and counted twice before they leave and twice when they arrive. When the Annona is steady, Rome feels virtuous. When it hiccups, even emperors sweat. Now step to the city's night shift. The praefectus vigilum commands the vigiles, firefighters, watchmen, practical philosophers with buckets and hooks. They'd patrol insulae with oil lamps and whisk brooms, fine bakers for storing wood improperly, and break up tavern brawls with a discipline that smells faintly of rescued bread. A different equestrian, the praefectus urbi, eventually senatorial, but often managed with equestrian efficiency, keeps urban order, courts thieves, and supervises markets. Together they make Rome survivable after sundown, which is a kind of constitution the law rarely writes down. Then the palace's shadow, the praefectus praetorio, or rather prefects, often two, who command the praetorian guard and, increasingly, run pieces of government when emperors discover delegation. Under Tiberius, the prefect Sejanus turned this office into a throne with a view, consolidating cohorts inside a single camp, the castra praetoria, and demonstrating how proximity can become policy. Under later emperors, the office acquires judicial competence, appeals, high-profile criminal cases, and administrative reach over parts of Italy and, eventually, over entire dioceses in the dominate. You feel the shift. Equestrian posts can mutate into ministries when emperors need hands they trust more than cousins. Mainstream fact to anchor the board, the equestrian order, property qualification roughly 400,000 sesterces, supplies a career ladder parallel to the senatorial one, the tres militiae, 3 military posts, or quatuor under the Julio Claudians, commander of an auxiliary cohort. Military tribune in a legion, prefect of a cavalry ala, and sometimes a staff post, then procuratorships and prefectures. Key equestrian offices include the Praefectus Annoni, Praefectus Vigilum, Praefectus Aegypti, and Praefectus Praetorio. Procurators manage imperial estates, mines, and the fiscus in provinces. A rationibus, imperial finance secretary, and a epistulis, correspondence, emerge as powerful secretariats. Under Claudius, equestrians blossom in administration. Under the Flavians and Antonines, the system thickens into what later ages will call bureaucracy. Money is the empire's nervous system, and procurators are its synapses. In Spain they supervise silver mines. In Noricum and Illyricum, iron. In Britain, lead, with those famous pigs stamped to say who owns what. In Gaul, imperial estates that grow wine the emperor's cellar pretends to ration strictly. Procurators Augusti in provinces manage the fiscus, the imperial treasury's revenues, while senatorial proconsuls still use the old aerarium channels. Side by side, the two purses learn to cooperate and to argue with abbaci. If you want to see how monarchy coexists with tradition, watch a procurator and a proconsul negotiate who pays for a bridge the army will march across and the town will tax. Quirky tidbit: the office of a rationibus, imperial finance, may start in the palace library but grows into a spreadsheet that covers oceans. Its chief can be a former slave or freedman early on, think Pallas or Narcissus under Claudius, later an equestrian. Either way, he learns to say no with velvet in his voice and to produce 3 copies of any number before lunch. Another, the cursus publicus, the imperial post, runs on equestrian orders, relay stations, mutations, inns, mansions, fresh mules, and those fabled bronze or ivory diplomata that tell a station master to hand over animals without arguing. Abuse the post for private love letters, and a prefect will shorten your route to unemployment. You can smell the social chemistry. Senators provide honor and law. Equestrians provide continuity and craft. Many equestrians are Italians. More and more are provincials whose fathers bought land, Latin, and a chance. The emperor uses them as counterweights, loyal to the throne that hired them, less tangled in old aristocratic networks, more willing to learn the imperial way to number things. When senators bristle at freedmen's secretaries under Claudius, the princeps trims the sails. By the Flavians and beyond, freedmen recede from front-stage politics, and equestrians in crisp tunics occupy the desks. Historians still argue whether this bureaucratic rise produced a competent, neutral civil service or merely a new elite with different spoons. Optimists point to standardized procedures, quicker appeals, predictable tax calendars, and archives that let cities quote last year's ruling back to this year's official. Skeptics note the temptations. A procurator metallorum can squeeze miners, and a nona prefect can make fortunes for shippers he favors. A praetorian prefect can audition for emperor. The evidence, inconveniently mixed, shows both stern audits and spectacular scandals, both cities thanking procurators in marble and emperors executing prefects who forgot humility. Light joke 1. A grain official boasts he feeds 1,000,000 mouths. A baker replies that he feeds one prefect, and it's harder. Light joke 2. A courier waves his diploma at a station keeper who asks for a bribe anyway. The courier says the emperor's seal should be enough. The station keeper says the mule can't read. Light joke 3. A praetorian prefect asks a jurist whether he may sit during an appeal. The jurist says yes, but never on the emperor's chair. The prefect stands for the rest of his life. Follow a career. An ambitious equestrian begins with the tres militiae, learns to shout in Latin at men who speak 4 other languages, then returns to Rome to audit a provincial treasury, then out again to manage imperial estates where harvests are politics. If he survives envy and accounting, he may earn a prefecture, Anoni if he can count, Vigilum if he can drill, Egypt if he can do both while also smiling at priests. A few will become praetorian prefects and discover that insomnia is part of the uniform. Many retire to modest villas with respectable statues and sons who aim at the same ladder. The empire keeps these ladders sturdy because they make ambition predictable, and predictable ambition is safer than the senatorial kind used to be. Mainstream aside, crisp as a docket, equestrian posts are salaried, stipends scaled by rank, graded, sexagenarius, centenarius, ducenarius, trescenarius, tens of thousands of sesterces per year, with promotion by imperial favor and performance. Prefects possess coercive powers within their remit. Procurators answer to the Arationibus and to the emperor directly. Egypt's prefect commands legions as an equestrian, a notable exception to senatorial monopoly on legionary command. The praetorian prefect's jurisdiction over appeals grows under Hadrian and Antoninus, making him one of the most powerful judges in the empire. Justice, too, is an equestrian craft. The libellus office processes petitions. The epistulus crafts replies in Greek and Latin. Imperial rescripts are copied to archives so that future officials can pretend they were born knowing the rule. In the provinces, cognitio extra ordinem, the emperor's out-of-normal procedure justice, flows through equestrian judges who travel with portable courts. They hear cases about tax arrears, boundary stones, guild privileges, and the proper age to free a slave. They quote jurists and the last good rescript with professional pride. Quirky tidbit 2. A procurator once wrote a circular letter specifying the official width of bread loaves qualifying for a market subsidy. Bakers posted it like a hymn and learned to slice according to law. Another, mines run by the fisc sometimes pay workers in kind, salt, oil, wine, at rates set by a schedule so consistent that archaeologists can date scraps of tablets by the prices alone. Bureaucracy leaves footprints. Later centuries read them like calendars. You notice how equestrian administration shapes succession politics without wearing a laurel. When a new princeps arrives, the fastest way to make the empire believe in tomorrow is to leave the prefects in place and the post running. Conversely, the fastest way to signal a new broom is to sack a praetorian prefect at dawn and appoint a new Arationibus by noon. Emperors who distrust the Senate lean hard on equestrians. Emperors who trust nobody lean harder. The system bends, it rarely breaks, because records outlast tempers. Historians still argue whether the empire's relative longevity owes more to legions at the rivers or to clerks at the doors. The sensible answer is both, but tonight you feel the clerk's victory. Bread arrives. Fires are doused. Petitions receive stamped answers. Coins of predictable fineness pay predictable salaries. Your inner Republican might itch at the thought that so much depends on men without ancestral pedigrees. Your outer citizen thanks the gods that a prefectus Anoni you will never meet knows precisely how many modii of wheat a Neapolitan warehouse can hold. As you leave the administrative quarter, a prefect collects a stack of wax tablets with the fatigued affection of a farmer for his tools. He will be here before dawn. So will his deputy. So will the courier from Ostia with weather from Alexandria. The Senate will convene tomorrow and speak in marble. The emperor will receive ambassadors and decide 3 lawsuits with a phrase. But the equestrians will count, route, feed, and file. Power wears many fabrics in Rome. This one looks like linen, ink-stained and durable. You hear them before you see them, the soft jingle of fallery on breastplates, the even scrape of hobnails over paving that remembers emperors by footstep rather than statue. The Praetorian Guard keeps its own weather, a hush that makes courtiers finish sentences quickly and doorkeepers stand a little straighter. When power sleeps, these are the men who decide whether it wakes gently. They begin, as so much else does, with Augustus making monarchy sound like housekeeping. He inherits the republican tradition of a general's personal cours praetoria, a field staff and hand-picked shield wall, and domesticates it for a capital that doesn't want to admit it hosts a throne. At first, cohorts are scattered in and around Rome to look less like a coup and more like good manners. Then Tiberius Prefect Sejanus concentrates them in one new, blunt noun, the Castra Praetoria, a purpose-built camp on the city's edge, 23c, brick and discipline planted like a red exclamation mark northeast of the Viminal. From there the guard can reach the Palatine fast enough to be a rumor and long enough to be a sentence. Mainstream fact, squared off like a barracks yard. The guard comprises several cohorts, 9 under Tiberius, later 12 under Vitellius and retrimmed by successors, each roughly 500 to 1,000 men depending on era. Recruitment favored Italians early on. Pay and privileges outranked the legionaries. Service terms were shorter, donatives appeared at accessions, and command rested with 1 or 2 prefects, prefecti praetorio, drawn from the equestrian order. Their camp, the Castra Praetoria, remained a fixed actor in Roman politics until Constantine disbanded the guard after 312 CE, replacing it with the Scoli Palatini, stand under the Palatine shadow at shift change. Centuries peel off like pages, passwords, tesserae, passed discreetly from hand to hand. The day's watchword will die with the day. The route through the palace has an etiquette of shadows. Who may approach the atrium? Who waits in the admissio antechamber? Who gets waved through by a cubicularius with a talent for frowning? Door-posts gleam where hands have learned to greet authority. In the periphery, the speculators, scouts turned couriers and bodyguards. hover at thresholds and vanish down corridors with sealed tablets tucked against ribs. You realize that the empire is partly a choreography of access. The prefect's office sits at the intersection of sword and sentence. A good prefect, think Burrus under Nero's early years, acts as brake and translator, what the army wants, what the Senate will bear, what the streets are whispering. A bad one, think Tigellinus later under Nero, teaches fear new tricks. Sejanus, the template of overreach, learns that proximity is a drug. He centralizes the cohorts, courts senators' wives, accumulates statues, and for a while makes Tiberius Rome feel like a house where the butler rehearses ownership. Then, just as publicly, he is arrested in the Curia, executed, and unremembered in the morning, proof that prefects do not own the weather, they only borrow it. Light joke 1. A poet mutters that the guard protects Rome from the emperor and the emperor from Rome. A praetorian replies he protects poets from their own endings. Light joke 2. A young recruit boasts his helmet is so polished he can shave in it. The armorer says that's because he'll never need to use it. Light joke 3. After donatives at an accession, a veteran claims his purse salutes more crisply than his arm. The pay clerk suggests to keep practicing. The guard's political silhouette fattens in emergencies. The Year of the Four Emperors, 69 C, reads like a Praetorian case study with sea salt. Galba stingy with donatives. Otho generous and briefly enthroned. Vitellius arriving attached to Rhine legions. Vespasian finally anchoring the calendar with Danube loyalties and Roman fatigue. Earlier, in 41 C, Claudius trembles behind a curtain after Caligula's assassination until Praetorians discover him, hustle him to their camp, and present the Senate with a fait accompli wrapped in a nervous man. In 193 C, the guard murders Pertinax for parsimony and, in a moment of jaw-dropping candor, auctions the empire on the camp rampart to Didius Julianus. The provinces refuse the city's auction house. Septimius Severus marches in, disbands the Praetorians, and replaces them with his own men. These headlines share one lesson. Whoever commands the guard cannot be ignored. Whoever depends upon it alone cannot long be obeyed. Historians still argue whether the guard was primarily a stabilizer, dissuading rashness with its visible calm, or a source of chronic instability, turning succession into a marketplace. Optimists note long stretches where prefects administered justice, calmed panic, and guarded emperors whose gifts were more administrative than charismatic. Pessimists point to 41 and 193 and insist that a capital with a standing palace army is a permanent experiment with loaded dice. The truth takes turns. Beyond the camp gate, the security ecosystem includes other quiet species. The Cohors Germanorum, a personal bodyguard of German auxiliaries under the Julio Claudians, offered exotic loyalty until its dissolution. The Frumentarii, originally grain agents, evolved into traveling investigators and imperial messengers, later replaced by Constantine's agents and rebus. The urban cohorts urbani, police Rome with heavier hands than the vigiles, palace chamberlains. Cubicularii, often freedmen, controlled the emperor's physical horizon and could make or unmake a morning by how briskly they announced a petitioner's name. The interface between sword and whisper is where palace security lives. Quirky tidbit: the Castra Praetoria's walls eventually fused with Rome's. Aurelian's later fortifications incorporated them, so the camp literally became part of the city's skin. Another, Praetorian standards bore the emperor's image. On guard festival days the cohorts saluted not just eagles but painted faces, a rite that taught loyalty with pigment and music. Daily routine, when no daggers write the news, is close order prose. The guard escorts the emperor to the games, visible rows of plumes that make audiences sit straighter, mans the secretarium during Senate sessions, not inside the curia, appearances matter, but close enough to be memory, and stands behind the chair during judicial hearings where cognitio turns petitions into rescripts. They guard treasury chambers and archives. Their presence in the audience hall is the thin line between supplication and pushiness. Their prefect hears appeals. By Hadrian's time, his judicial competence is vast, and signs orders that will decide whether a provincial spends a winter waiting for a local governor or for Rome's reply. Mainstream aside, sober as a morning drill, donatives mark successions, Augustus modestly, later emperors more liberally. The guard's pay climbed above that of legions, service terms shortened, often 16 years versus 20 plus in legions. The prefecture grew from military command to administrative and judicial superoffice. Under Diocletian and Constantine, court security reforms marginalized or abolished the traditional guard, whose veterans later appear in very different uniforms. Your steps follow a corridor where security becomes ritual. Before dawn, the salutatio, clients and officers lining up to salute, doubles as an intelligence brief. Who's in town? Which governor's report arrived at the epistolis? Whether the grain fleet cleared roads? A chamberlain announces, a prefect prioritizes, a secretary drafts the emperor's orations to the Senate. At each doorway, a guard measures distance with his eye, close enough to respond, far enough to look like furniture. Good security in Rome is the art of being visible without becoming the view. The ethics of proximity wear grooves. Prefects who serve well protect emperors from both flattery and panic. They remind princelings that swords obey law here and that the law begins with the emperor's better moods. Burrus, paired with Seneca, kept Nero reasonable until music and impulse won. Later, under Marcus Aurelius, the guard fought hard at the frontiers and behaved better at home. Under Commodus, its patience frayed, and palace corridors learned new footfalls after dark. The same institution, tuned by different hands, hums or howls. Light joke 4, soft as a campfire a praetorian claims he is. The wall around the wall. A bricklayer replies he's the paycheck behind the pay. Light joke 5, when a senator asks a guard whether the password ever changes, the guard answers, only when the emperor does, and then winks because even jokes require discretion. Light joke 6, a clerk complains the prefect's seal is too heavy. The prefect says it keeps bad decisions from blowing away. Historians still argue about the perfect staffing of an emperor's day. How many rows of soldiers reassure without scaring? How many doors should be open? How many petitions should cross a blade's shadow? We have letters, Pliny to Trajan asking about the right number of guards in a provincial theater. We have law, digest passages quoting prefects' rulings. We have brick and coin to fill the gaps. But the lived truth you feel at this hour is more tactile. The empire's peace depends not only on frontier moats, but on polished corridors where a dozen men know when to cough. Before you leave, look once toward Constantine's horizon. After the Milvian Bridge and the recutting of court life, the praetorians will be dissolved. The Castra Praetoria will lose its purpose. The Scoli Palatini, palace schools, will take up ceremonial guard with different insignia and a new geography centered on the emperor's moving court, eventually Constantinople. But in the centuries you are walking through now, the Praetorian Guard is the metronome of proximity. too slow and usurpers slip in. Too fast and liberty forgets how to breathe. The regime's genius on its best days is to keep the tempo human. You step back into daylight, and the city pretends nothing is dangerous. A boy salutes a passing helmet with a grin he will later learn to moderate. A baker delivers loaves to the cast straw gate and gets a nod worth more than coin. A senator adjusts his toga before mounting the curious steps, careful to look impressed but not intimidated by the shadows behind him. The guard returns to its postures, alert, bored, present, and Rome to its theater. If you sleep well tonight, it is partly because men in plumes have agreed, for the moment, to be scenery. You follow the sound of styluses instead of trumpets. The farther you move from the parade ground, the more decisive whispers become. This is the Emperor's concilium, not a senate, not exactly a cabinet, but the warm little room where decisions put on their shoes. Friends of the Emperor is the polite label, Amici Consilii, and the caste shifts with reigns, senior senators for dignity, sharp equestrians for detail, one or two jurists who know how to trap ambiguity in grammar, and a prefect or two whose job is to remind everyone that facts travel on roads guarded by men. You sit in the corner like a tile the mosaic forgot, and learn how empires think. The meeting opens with paper, well, wax and parchment, because policy here is written before it is spoken. A secretary from a libellus, petitions, reads summaries of cases sent from provinces. A city wants relief after an earthquake. A guild asks to change admission fees. A widow appeals a governor's sentence. Another clerk from a bipistulus, correspondence, has draft letters in Latin and in Greek, depending on where you want your gratitude to land. The emperor glances toward the jurist, who quotes last year's rescript and a line from the Praetorian Edict. A prefect adds a reality check about mules. The result becomes a sentence everyone can sign without blushing. Mainstream fact, precise as a docket entry. Under the Principate, the Concilium Principis crystallizes under Augustus and Tiberius as a formal advisory body. Claudius expands the palace secretariats, often staffed by powerful freedmen. Narcissus a bipistulus, Pallas a rationibus. Callistus a libellus. Under the Flavians and Antonines, equestrians increasingly occupy these offices. By Hadrian's and Marcus' day, jurists like Salvius Julianus, Papinian, and Ulpian sit close to the pen that signs. Imperial decisions are issued as rescripta, replies to petitions, mandata, standing instructions to officials, decreta, judgments when the emperor sits as judge, and edicta, general proclamations. The paperwork becomes precedent. The precedent becomes a network that lets a farmer in Africa quote Rome to his own governor and expect to be taken seriously. You tour the desks the way a pilgrim tours altars. At a libellus, petitions are triaged like patients, urgent, routine, insolent. Scribes compress long provincial laments into neat libelli that the emperor can read between audiences. The replies, rescripta, are copied verbatim into archive books, codices, and duplicated to provincial registries. In a bipistulus, two chiefs divide the world by language, Latin letters to the west, Greek to the east, each with stock openings, calibrated complements, and closing formulas that tell a city exactly how favored it is. Finance is a rationibus, ledgers and budgets, arrears and audits, linked to procurators across provinces and to the fiscus's armored strongboxes. A cognitionibus handles judicial drafting. A studius prepares briefing memos. Yes, the emperor's got homework. Later, A memoria becomes the office that reminds the sovereign what he promised last month. The folders are literally stored in scrinia, portable chests, so a mobile court can keep thinking while it moves. Quirky tidbit, imperial shorthand, noti Tyroniani, as tradition credits Cicero's freedman Tyro, lets notarii take down speeches and judgments in squiggles that look like vines and secrets. A good notarius could trap a paragraph in a breath and later blossom it into fair copy. A bad one could turn a governor into a goat with a single ink blot. Another, the palace kept, daybooks, acta diurna principis, noting who was received, what was decided, what was said, diaries of power that sometimes leaked as rumor, sometimes as policy. Decisions here grow from questions big and small. A governor asks whether soldiers can legally marry while on service, the Principate's long dance before full legalization under Septimius Severus. A city begs for remission of aurum coronarium, gold crowns, honorary tribute that is, inconveniently, gold. A boundary commission in Cappadocia disputes an old surveyor's stones. The concilium decides with a blend of law, thrift, and weather reports. When emperors like Hadrian travel, the concilium travels too, mobile Rome, writing law in Antioch on Monday and in Tarraco by the next fair wind. The jurist's voices are the room's conscience. Julianus systematizes law. Papinian humanizes it. Ulpian and Paul write crisp sentences that later lawyers will quote until ink remembers them by heart. Their opinions, responsa, may be delivered as if spontaneous but are often drafts refined by secretaries who learn to think in subjunctives. When a rescript says, "It has seemed to me," mihi visum est, you're hearing a chorus in unison. Later, under Severus and Caracalla, these jurist texts will be granted special authority. I use respondendi ex auctoritate principis and then citation privileges, so a phrase born in a side room stabilizes a frontier court a generation later. Light joke 1. A clerk swears he can tell which petitions will be granted by the first line. If it starts greatest of all emperors, it's going to cost us, he says, and the irrationibus man sighs audibly. Light joke 2. Asked why rescripts begin. The emperor to so-and-so, greetings. A notarius says, because good luck would be too honest. Light joke 3. A Greek secretary insists the Latin section misplaces commas. The Latin man retorts that Greek has too many. The jurist threatens to outlaw both. Historians still argue whether the freedman dominance under Claudius was a blip or the blueprint. Traditionalists bristle at men without ancestral imagines controlling access and letters. Moderns note that many were extraordinarily competent. Claudius Narcissus could draft a policy faster than senators could agree on seating. Yet after scandal and resentment, the Flavians shift weight toward equestrians, making the secretariats look less like a freedman's meteoric rise and more like a professional civil service. The debate drags along questions of class, prejudice, and whether senatorial nostalgia makes a good filing system. The concilium also manages optics. Draft orations to the Senate that make imperial initiatives sound like senatorial ideas. Prepare, reason decrees. After sensational trials, think the SC de Pison patter, so the empire receives not just a verdict but a narrative. Polished speeches for emperors who are better at soldiers than syllables. Under Trajan and Pliny, you can watch the machine correspond in real time. Pliny writes from Bithynia about fire brigades, bathhouse budgets, and Christians. Trajan replies with calm, practical bylines that have passed through a bipistulus and a jurist's hand. Administration, here, is letters kept domestic in tone even when they decide lives. Beneath the Latin and Greek lies a web of indices. The Commentarii Principis record rescripts by topic. Libri Mandatorum compiles standing instructions to categories of officials. Breviaria summarize longer files for quick reference. The scrinia are labeled by color: purple for letters, green for petitions, red for finance, so later antiquity remembers, at least, when a provincial official quotes, as in the time of the divine Claudius. He is not just venerating dust, he is using a filing tag. Memory is the empire's most valuable non-metal resource. The secretaries are its miners. The council's composition reveals politics at body temperature. A cautious princeps invites senior senators to share the table, letting dignity watch the drafts. An anxious princeps leans on prefects and equestrians, letting sharpness outrun ceremony. Hadrian, famously hands-on, interviews his own policies. Antoninus Pius prefers to stay home and let paper travel. Marcus divides hours between judgments and philosophy, trusting jurists to keep the law from sagging. Under a Domitian or a Commodus, the same desks serve fear instead of prudence. Under a Severus, they serve a soldier's priorities with a lawyer's tact. Quirky tidbit 2. Acceptories, fast note-takers, fill wax tablets in a cursive that could make a crow dizzy. Some use wooden codices bound with cords, protobooks, for drafts. In winter, ink freezes in poorly heated rooms. A grumpy secretary warms his pen over a lamp and claims this is why rescripts read warmer in February. Another, the palace kept model letters for every occasion. Congratulations to cities for new aqueducts. Condolences to governors whose villas burned. Stern notes about amphitheater collapses. That scribes could adjust like recipes. The path from this room to the provinces is a relay. A rescript leaves the Palatine stamped by the emperor's ring, joins the cursus publicus at the city gate, changes meals at mutations, eats stew at mansions, and arrives at a governor's court to be read aloud in front of townsfolk who will remember the phrasing better than the content. The governor copies it into his archive, local scribes into theirs, litigants into private notebooks. This is how a single morning's decision becomes 1,000 afternoons' routine. Good government is simply habit with an author. Light joke 4. Soft as a marginal note, a provincial scribe says the emperor's rescripts are like rain, sometimes late, always binding, terrible for dry laundry. Light joke 5. The libellus chief claims he can tell a city's wealth by the weight of its petitions. The irrationibus man says he can tell by the number of times they say, "Eternal loyalty." Light joke 6. A jurist apologizes that his opinion is long because he had no time to make it short. The emperor underlines "short" and writes, "Next time." Historians still argue whether the concilium constrained bad emperors. Could wise advisors restrain Domitian or Commodus? Sometimes, until they were dismissed. Could good paperwork outlast bad tempers? Often, rescripts copied into provincial law books became constraints even on future caprice. The chancellery's true power is not veto, it is momentum. 1,000 small, consistent decisions make a groove rulers find easier to follow than to fight. You leave as the last tablet is sanded smooth. Outside, the city does not care who wrote today's letters. It cares that the grain price stayed put and the bridge stayed open. Inside, the secretaries blow on cooling wax, stack files into scrinia, and tie cords with knots they could tie in their sleep. If the legions are Rome's muscle and the Senate its posture, this is the nervous system. Signals sent at the right speed, in the right language, to the right limb. Empires don't survive on victories alone. They survive on sentences that arrive on time. You ride out with the governor before sunrise, because dawn is when reputation smells best. The litter creaks. The mules snort polite steam. Orderlies shoulder bundles of tablets and wax as carefully as priests carry gods. In the courtyard, a painted board receives the fresh edictum provincial, the provincial rulebook for the year, whitewashed smooth and inked with neat Latin that local scribes will copy in Greek by noon. It lists court days, interest caps, fees for market stalls, protection for harvests, rules on beating debtors, don't, and a promise you can feel in the verbs. Justice will arrive at predictable hours and keep its sandals clean. The governor's title tells you which leash he's wearing. If he is a senatorial proconsul, this is Asia or Africa. Rich, pacified, no legions under his personal hand, and he wears the old dignity with the new audit. If he is an imperial legatus Augusti pro praetor, his province is one of the emperors, Syria, Britain, the Germanies, the Metias, where legions stamp time and the imperium maius in Rome hums louder than any local drum. Either way, the architecture is the same, a short tenure, often a year or 3, a long paper trail, a procurator counting fiscal veins nearby, and the knowledge that couriers can outrun bravado. The leash is not a rope, it's a route. Mainstream fact, crisp as a boundary stone. Under the Principate, provinces divided into senatorial and imperial. Senatorial proconsuls, ex-consuls or ex-praetors, governed Asia, Africa, and a rotating caste, generally without legions. Imperial legates, senators, governed militarized provinces under the emperor's imperium maius. Equestrian procurators managed the fiscus, imperial revenues, alongside them. Governors issued annual edicts, held assize circuits. Conventus heard cases via cognitio extra ordinem, and could be prosecuted afterward for extortion under a long line of leges de reputandis, restitution laws. Appeals could run to the emperor. Rescripts returned along the cursus publicus with the emperor's seal and a speed that made provincial gossip feel slow. You joined the spring assize like a moving courtroom with tents. At each conventus town, the governor sets up under a colonnade, a curule chair turned into a traveling throne, flanked by the cornicularius, chief of staff, a commentariensis, record keeper, interpreters who make Latin behave in Greek, and a handful of beneficiarii, staff officers, who can turn a whispered instruction into the sound of sandals assembling. Plaintiffs line up. A temple claims its land was shaved by an ambitious farmer. A guild disputes membership fees. A widow appeals a harsh sentence from a municipal magistrate who confused sternness with law. The governor listens, quotes his edict, consults a worn notebook of rescripts from earlier reigns, and writes rulings that scribes will copy into town archives. Each decision becomes a small habit. This is the empire's real geography, habits connected by roads. Between hearings, the leash tugs. A letter from the equestrian procurator arrives with numbers and a tone that suggests he smiles rarely. Customs receipts are down at the river port. The leaseholder on the imperial forest has misunderstood enumeration. The town with the new amphitheater forgot to pay the stone tax. The governor walks a line between friendship and form. He cannot bully the fiscus. He must not look like a cashier. He writes a polite order. The procurator writes a polite reply. Both copy the correspondence to Rome as if good manners were a receipt. Quirky tidbit. When the governor posts his edict, boys rub their fingers on the whitewash as if the law might transfer like chalk. In some cities, a bilingual version is etched into stone on the forum wall, Latin on one side, Greek on the other, so that litigants can point at clauses like cooks at recipes. Another, governors sometimes travel with a portable sundial set to Rome time, a fussy gesture that makes court hours feel imperial even when clouds lie about noon. The military versions of this routine add drums. In Britain, the governor reviews legionaries under a sky that can't decide. He inspects stitches, checks vellum angles, watches an optio pace a centuria through thrusts that look like punctuation. The garrison towns, colony built by veterans, ask for road funds and a new bathhouse boiler. A tribe beyond the river with last year's treaty begins to test the fence posts. The governor sends a speculator with an interpreter and a bag of gifts, brooches, salt, Roman salter smiles, and hopes not to write a winter campaign into his calendar. On this frontier, the leash is a bronze diploma promising citizenship to auxiliaries after 25 years. The signature is in iron. Historians still argue whether short tenures and paired fiscal officers created accountability or guaranteed mediocrity. Rotate men quickly, and no one grows roots corrupt enough to drink a province dry. Rotate men quickly, and nobody learns the dialect of local problems before he starts packing. The Pliny-Trajan letters from Bithynia showcase both sides. Pliny, careful and new, writes about everything: fire brigades, runaway budgets, leaky aqueducts, a theater that keeps collapsing because the architect enjoys optimism. Trajan replies with calm templates: no guilds that can turn into clubs. Yes to finishing the bathhouse, but not with a lottery. Defer the canal until we can afford it. Competent micromanagement, say optimists. Proof that provinces needed imperial babysitting, say skeptics. Both drink from the same inkwell. Light joke 1. A village elder tells the governor their boundary stone has walked into a neighbor's vineyard. The governor replies that stones do not walk but neighbors do. Light joke 2. A tax farmer insists he collected gently. A bruised debtor asks if gentleness always leaves fingerprints. The governor finds gentleness in a sum that teaches adverbs manners. Light joke 3. A Greek town stages a flattery contest. The winning inscription reads, "To the most merciful governor who never needed to be merciful." And the governor wonders whether praise counts as perjury. The leash tightens after the tour. Back in the provincial capital, the governor's quaestor balances ledgers against promises. The tabularium smells of wax and numbers. A messenger from Rome brings a rescript that edits yesterday's judgment with a polite and binding "Mihi visum est." The Imperial Cult Committee asks which day the governor will preside at sacrifices for the emperor's health. He chooses a date that will not annoy the local god. You notice how religion oils obedience. Altars to Roma and Augustus teach cities to perform gratitude. Priests of the imperial cult learn to spell the emperor's titles correctly, which is an education in itself. Justice is the leash's favorite trick. Under the Republic, governors leaned on jury courts and their own charisma. Under the Principate, cognitio extra ordinem, the out-of-formula hearing, lets a governor sit as judge with all the emperor's borrowed dignity. He hears appeals from municipal courts, uses torture sparingly and theatrically, the law's grim vowels, frees a slave for revealing a forgery, and remands a child to a guardian with a lecture he gives every season and means every time. If a case smells hotter, citizenship disputed, a Roman executed by a city council that forgot rules, A touch of maestas, he suspends judgment and writes to Rome. The answer returns with the emperor's seal and a phrasing even the losing party can quote with wounded pride. The leash is also made of audits and fear of fame. Governors return to Rome and can be charged with extortion, repetandi, by provincials who arrive with boxes of receipts and expressions that have rehearsed patience. A bad man like Verres, you remember the pre-Principate model, becomes a courtroom parable. Later, under the Empire, we get quieter examples. Men find careers cooled, a discreet retirement to a small estate where olives do not gossip. The point isn't only punishment, it's memory. Inscriptions thanking honest governors do double duty as warnings to their successors who can read. Quirky tidbit 2. On circuit, a governor carries a folding curule chair with bronze feet shaped like lion paws, a traveling dignity that squeaks when set down on uneven cobbles. In some towns, the local architect lays a small paving square perfectly flat in front of the basilica, and the governor rewards exactitude with a public compliment that the architect repeats in taverns forever. Another, governors kept friend lists, amici, of local notables who could be consulted and gently bound by favors. The lists then became invitations to dinner with menus that taught provincial cuisine to Roman appetites. You notice how the leash runs both ways. The emperor's maneta, standing instructions, arrive with the force of habit. Don't burden cities with billeting beyond quotas. Protect veterans' land from clever encroachment. Enforce price controls only in famine and then with care. Treat freedmen's wills with the caution jurists advise. Governors copy them into their edicts so that law feels local. Cities cite them back when memory needs help. Over time, the mandata accrete into something that looks very much like a code, even before codification is a word the chancery dares say aloud. Light joke 4. A governor writes home that he has reduced banditry by half. The emperor replies to reduce the other half. Light joke 5. A procurator signs, "Your devoted colleague," the governor adds in the margin, "and accountant." Light joke 6. A tribal chief brings a hostage son as guarantee. The boy asks whether Rome always makes friends this way. The interpreter says yes, but most friends later thank us. Historians still argue whether governors were primarily agents of extraction or of order. Archaeology loves amphorae and milestones, the commerce and roads that suggest a working peace. Papyri and inscriptions love lawsuits and taxes, the frictions that sustain a state. The answer depends on where you stand. In a city with a harbor, Rome is a contract you can enforce. In a hill village, Rome is a census with questions you can't ignore. What sings through the sources is regularity. Even complaints arrive on schedule.at sunset. The governor bathes. The day's dust sluices away. A secretary reads tomorrow's docket in the tepidarium while steam edits syllables into kindness. You walk back across the forum under a sky filing itself from gold to ink and past the whitewashed board where the edict dried this morning. A boy traces a clause about debt bondage, sounding the words like a spell. A merchant points to the line about fair weights when a buyer quibbles. A priest checks the calendar of court days before promising an auspice. The leash, you realize, is not just for governors. It loops around habits and tightens softly around expectations until the province behaves like a rhythm. Rome governs by schedules wrapped in ceremony. The surprise is how much sleep that buys. You stand beside a counting table and learn that empires hum in bronze before they sing in marble. Coins click, styluses whisper, a procurator's eyebrow performs arithmetic. Legions do not march on glory, They march on paydays that arrive when they should. Largest at games, aqueduct arches, veterans' land, each is a sentence whose subject is revenue. You read the grammar on 3 lines: the aerarium, old public treasury, the fiscus, imperial chest, and the tributary streams that feed both without drowning the towns that open their mouths to drink. Start with the split, because the split explains the tone. The republic's aerarium, kept under Saturn's temple, still exists, managed by senatorial quaestors and later prefects. It pays for the dignified things, stipends for certain urban services, senatorial provinces' expenses, the paperwork that lets tradition pretend it isn't on allowance. The fiscus, emperor's treasury, emerges under Augustus as the purse that actually keeps the machine moving. Legion's stipends, prefects' salaries, the cursus publicus, the "please don't riot" budget that underwrites Rome's grain. A finance secretary, a rationibus, and provincial procurators connect the dots. The 2 treasuries quarrel like old brothers, borrow like cousins, and balance like men who would like to keep their heads. Mainstream fact ink the ledger. In 6C, Augustus creates the aerarium militare, a dedicated military treasury funded by a new 5% inheritance tax, vicesima hereditatium, and a 1% sales tax on auctions, centesima rerum venalium, plus startup cash from the princeps. Direct provincial taxes, land, tributum soli, and head or property assessments, tributum capitis, flow into the fiscus via procurators. Indirect taxes, vectigalia, such as customs duties, portoria, tolls, and monopoly rents, mines, salt works, are leased or managed by the imperial administration. Italy is relieved of regular direct land tax, a prized privilege, while the provinces pay the steady rhythm that underwrites. Roman peace. You watch a census compile the future. Surveyors pace fields. Registrars write acreages, crops, names of men who wish their grandfathers had lied about fertility. The register becomes money in slow motion, tributum solely calculated from soil and optimism, tributum capitis from persons and property outside farmland. In cities, decuriones, councillors guarantee quotas. Their wealth makes civic pride compulsory. Miss a payment, and a magistrate's polite letter arrives with a procurator's impolite glare. Appeals exist. Pity is not a line item. Indirect taxes make borders tick. At river crossings and sea harbors the portorium takes its bite. Rates differ. 2.5%, 5%, sometimes more, schedules posted on boards that smell of tar and brine. In Egypt, customs at Alexandria and the Red Sea funnel Eastern luxuries past men with scales. The famous Mesiris papyrus in a clerk's future desk will one day brag about pepper and pearls, but today you just see ledgers behaving smugly. In towns, a 4% manumission tax, vicesima libertatis, turns freedom papers into revenue. At funerals, fees stage a quiet afterlife for the fisc. Vespasian, earthier, hangs a tax on urine, vectigal urini, collected from public urinals and sold to fullers for bleach. When teased, he holds a coin to his nose. Does it smell? Practicality outvotes poetry. Quirky tidbit. Receipts in Egypt often ride on ostraca, broken pottery sherds, inked with names, amounts, and the clerk's flourish. Humble, durable, and scattered now across museum drawers like the empire's spare change. Another, abaci, counting boards with grooves and pebbles, serve as calculators. A board procurator once doled raisins to an underclerk every time the sums balanced, which is how accounting acquired a childish grin in one office for a month. Coinage oils the machine and occasionally squeals. The mints strike denarii and aurei with emperor's abbreviations. Fineness matters because paydays taste of silver, not slogans. Nero trims the silver content. Later emperors followed the temptation. Soldiers, living calculators, learned to judge purity by sound and patience. Donatives, one-off gifts at accessions and victories, spike the budget. Stipends creep upward. Domitian raises legionary pay. Septimius Severus raises it more, while also letting soldiers legally marry, which makes paymaster lists longer and jokes better. In lean times, requisitions in kind, annona militaris, replace coin at the frontiers, grain, fodder, cloth, boots. Cities grumble, governors smooth, the fiscus promises to remember the favor, and sometimes it does. Historians still argue whether Roman tax burden was light or heavy. One camp sees relatively modest rates, regularized collection, and prosperity that stamps amphorae from Spain to the Rhine. Another sees regressive levies falling on smallholders and decuriones trapped into bankrupting themselves for civic quotas. Italy's tax privilege is debated, too. No land tax, yes, but indirect imposts, fees, and requisitions still knocked on doors. By the 3rd century, the distinction blurs further as crisis erases old exemptions. And then there is the thorniest argument. Was the fiscus the emperor's private purse or the state's new heart? Moderns lean toward institutional treasury. But ancient gossip loves to imagine emperors confusing policy with pocket.I. In the provinces you glimpse the tax triangle at work. Governor's edict sets terms. Procurator's office tallies. City council enforces through curiales who discover that honor and surety are synonyms. Delinquents meet coercitio, seizure of goods, occasional flogging if the law's teeth are bared. But more often there is schedule pressure and social shame. Publicani, the old tax farmers, haven't vanished. They lease indirect taxes, customs, mines, in some regions, audited now by imperial eyes. Direct assessments prefer the state's own hands. It's less romantic than the Republic's auctions and more survivable. Light joke 1. A farmer tells a taxman the harvest was shy. The taxman says shyness ends at the scale. Light joke 2. A customs officer asks a merchant if his amphorae are all wine. The merchant says, mostly hope. The officer says hope pays 5% too. Light joke 3. A legionary quips his pay is like Saturn's rings, beautiful on coins, distant in camp. The pay clerk replies planets arrive on schedule. Egypt proves why revenue wears security. The prefect there is equestrian, unique in commanding legions because grain behaves badly without soldiers. Nilometers grade taxes by flood height. Scribes in white linen count like priests. Caravans from the Red Sea tip customs. Royal estates, now imperial, ship wheat and papyrus down a river disciplined by barges. The Fiscus Alexandrinus feeds Rome's temper. When storms choke Puteoli, an Annona prefect opens emergency stores and writes a letter that can make or unmake a season's politics. Meanwhile, a ration ibis pulls threads Rome-wide. Mines in Spain, estates in Gaul, imperial quarries in Egypt's Mons Porphyrites. Purple stone for purple sentences, each run by procurators with targets and enemies. The fiscus also pays for the cursus publicus, relay stations with honest mules, stamped passes, diplomata, that station masters honor because they like employment. Abuse the post, and your next letter arrives on foot with a reprimand stapled to it. Mainstream aside, tidy as a clerk's knot, The aerarium militare pays veterans their premia, cash bonuses, on discharge. Auxiliary veterans receive bronze diplomas conferring citizenship on them and their children, a benefit measured in rights and tax codes. The 5% inheritance tax exempts close kin. Aurum coronarium. Honorary, gold crowns, is irregular tribute converted into regular expectation. Under the Flavians and Antonines, procurators pay scales, sexagenarius, centenarius, ducenarius, trescenarius, standardized incentives, coin reforms, Nervus/Trajan stabilization, later Antonine stability. Produce decades when budgets and bridges match. The state spends theatrically and prosaically. Games are policy with drums. Grain is policy with silence. Urban building, forums, sewers, aqueducts, advertises prosperity and employment. Frontier forts advertise prudence. In lean years, emperors pawn spectacle to keep paydays. Marcus Aurelius auctions palace treasures during plague and war. Buyers later return them to applause that sounds like interest forgiven. The people remember both gestures. The fiscus remembers the receipts. Quirky tidbit 2. Some towns maintained tax calendars, carved in stone, market days, dues, deadlines, so that the illiterate could govern their lives with fingers on dates. Another, a few paymasters carried money in sealed leather bags stamped with the cohort's mark. One bag, dropped and recovered years later, produced a small festival and a large audit. Historians still argue the degree to which taxes created versus merely recorded Romanization. Did people become Roman because taxes nudged them into censuses, Latin contracts, and courts, administrative gravity, or because roads and peace made trade habits that felt Roman? The answer is a duet again. A tax receipt teaches Latin numerals. A customs board teaches patience. A veteran's bonus teaches loyalty in coin. Culture can write an invoice. By dusk. The procurator's eyebrow relaxes. Ledgers tie neatly. A messenger leaves with 3 rescripts folded like quiet birds. You step outside to the smell of bread and ink and think about how many tiny obediences add up to a legion's stipend and a city's calm. The best tax system is boring, predictable rates, honest scales, appeal routes that work, coin that keeps its promises. The empire's brag is not that it squeezes, it's that it schedules. And for tonight, that schedule includes your sleep. You settle into the hush that follows coins and precedes sleep, the sound of law writing itself on wax. Rome's empire is not merely moats and milestones. It is also sentences that arrive on time. Out here, justice has 2 main voices. One is local and rhythmic, the magistrate's edictum pinned to a basilica wall, promising how he will judge this year. The other is distant and decisive, the emperor's written reply, the rescriptum, writing the post with a seal that makes disputes stand straighter. Between them, 1,000 cases find their endings, and an empire learns to recognize itself in prose. Start with the edict. In the Republic, the urban praetor in Rome posted an annual program, what actions he would allow, what defenses he'd accept, what procedural hands he'd extend to new problems. This Praetorian edict was a laboratory, renewing each year but carrying forward the useful bits until custom looked suspiciously like code. Governors brought the habit to provinces. At the first light of a tenure, you watch a board whitened, then inked, on court days, sureties, evictions, guardianship, fair weights, and the sworn oath a magistrate makes to his own promises. Town scribes copy a Latin version, then a Greek. Merchants read with their fingers. A widow mouths the clause she hopes to need. Mainstream fact, neat as a docket. Under Hadrian, early 2nd century, the ever-evolving Praetorian Edict is formalized into the Edictum Perpetuum, a standardized, perpetual text revised by the jurist Salvius Julianus. No more annual improvisation. The law's skeleton is fixed, though muscles still flex through interpretation. Meanwhile, imperial justice grows by rescripta, replies to petitions, decreta, judgments when the emperor sits as judge, edicta, general proclamations, and mandata, standing instructions to officials. Together with senatorial decrees and municipal charters, think the Lex Ernitana bronze tablets from Spain. These documents turn habit into an infrastructure. The emperor's rescript feels like whether the day it arrives. A petition, compressed by a libellus clerks into a neat dilemma, comes back as a sentence beginning. The emperor to so-and-so, greetings. It cites a principle, nods to equity, maybe quotes a jurist, and ends with a verb that changes a life. The reply is copied into books in Rome and books in the province. Soon it is quoted in court as if the gods had footnotes. A governor hearing cognitio extra ordinem, out of formula, cases that don't fit old jury molds, leans on these letters to keep judgment from wandering. You can hear law's two dialects at once. The ius civil, citizens' law, born of ancient statutes and patrician memory, sits beside the ius gentium, law of peoples, the flexible equity for strangers and commerce. A Syrian trader selling dyed wool in Narbo may never learn Rome's founding myths, but he learns that a promise written on a tablet and witnessed by 5 names has a weight you can carry across mountains. Municipal charters standardize town life, councils, duoviri, fines, curial duties, so that a magistrate's gavel sounds familiar in Spain and Judea alike. Quirky tidbit, contracts were often written on pairs of wooden tablets tied and sealed. The text inside was duplicated on the outer face in shorter form. In a dispute you break the seals in court, little wax funerals for private promises. If the inner and outer texts disagree, witnesses blush. Another, curse tablets, thin lead sheets scribbled with pleas to underworld powers, turn up in law's shadow, asking gods to tie a rival's tongue in knots before tomorrow's hearing. Rome prefers reason, but it never despises superstition if it might help. The jurists are this system's quiet chorus. Gaius writes a textbook, Institutes, that students copy the way birds copy songs. Papinian smells equity like a vintner. Ulpian and Paul craft sentences that fit into future shelves. Augustus had already granted leading jurists the ius respondendi ex auctoritate principis, the authority to give opinions, by imperial authority, which magistrates could treat as pre-approved wisdom. Later, citation rules will privilege certain jurists so that, even if emperors change, good paragraphs keep their jobs. Light joke 1. A litigant complains his advocate quoted, Ulpian, to the wrong end of the sentence. The judge says that's the correct end for losers. Light joke 2. A clerk sighs that the Edictum Perpetuum is perpetual mostly because it's heavy. Light joke 3. A town crier practicing. Mihi visum est. For an imperial rescript keeps saying, Mihi visum est bonus. And a boy suggests that if the emperor wanted bonus points, he'd have said, historians still argue whether Roman law delivered impartial equity or merely formalized hierarchy. Admirers see standardized procedures, appeals that work, and juristic insistence on reasoned judgment. Critics see a system that protected status, patria potestas remaining formidable, slavery sustained, manumission regulated rather than abolished, women's legal capacities hemmed by guardianship until practice outran theory. They quarrel, too, about Roman law's cosmopolitanism. Was the ius gentium genuinely universal, or simply Roman convenience wearing a toga of fairness? The debate survives because the documents do. Walk a morning of courts. In Rome, the centumbral panel hears inheritance tangle, bonorum possessio, praetorian grant to an heir, elbowing archaic succession rules. A father's will spiting a spendthrift son, the praetorian formula making a compromise sound noble. In the provinces, a governor sits extra ordinem. He hears a manumission deed challenged as a forgery, quotes the SC Velianum to limit a woman's guarantee of another's debt, and defers a civitas dispute to the emperor because citizenship makes tax and marriage law change shape. On a frontier, a soldier writes a will naming his cohort brother as heir even though, technically, soldiers' wills break rules. Imperial practice tolerates the habit because dying men have leverage in tradition. Mainstream aside, crisp as a seal. Hadrian's Edictum Perpetuum via Julianus. Juristic stars of the 2nd, 3rd centuries, Gaius, Papinian, Ulpian, Paul, Modestinus. Cognitio gradually edging out the older formula procedure. Municipal charters like the Flavian town laws, imperial. Rescripts preserved in archives across the empire. And much later, the classical jurists' writings forming the backbone of Justinian's Digest, a 6th century Byzantine codification that will re-export Roman law to medieval Europe like a forgotten technology rediscovered. Law also rearranges families with gentler verbs. Patria potestas, a father's power over children, softens in practice. Dowries, with rules for return, protect wives and sign manu marriages. Guardianship for women often becomes formality when capable women manage estates and litigate through guardians who nod on schedule. Manumission, by census entry, vindicta, ceremonial touch with a rod or wool, creates freed citizens with obligations and rights that law learns to enumerate. The vicesima libertatis tax, the duties of freedmen to patrons, and the limits on those duties when patrons confuse gratitude with greed. Quirky tidbit 2. Bronze diplomas granted to auxiliary veterans literally hinge. Open them and you read the Greek and Latin versions of a citizenship grant, with witnesses' names biting the metal. Some diplomas turn up pierced with a hole where a proud owner wore it on a cord at festivals. Another, wax tablets from Vindolanda on the British frontier preserve birthday invitations, boot orders, and leave requests. Prose so domestic it makes imperial law feel like a roof rather than a wall. The way law travels matters as much as what it says. A rescript leaves the Palatine, hits mansions and mutations, arrives at a basilica where a crier reads the Latin while an interpreter shadows in Greek. A clerk copies it into the commentarii. The town posts a summary. Advocates memorize the phrasing the way actors memorize cues. Next year, another city cites the same sentence and wins. A habit has been born. The emperor never meets the litigants. They live inside his adjectives. Light joke 4. A provincial advocate insists the ius gentium supports his client. The judge asks which gens he has in mind. The advocate says, the generous one. Light joke 5. A jurist scolds a notary for sloppy handwriting. The notary says he is merely anticipating the digest. Nobody laughs until a century later. Light joke 6. A magistrate boasts he dispenses justice swiftly. A clerk says he dispenses receipts faster. The town applauds both. Historians still argue how far down the social ladder law reached. Did smallholders, freed women, and soldiers' families effectively use courts, or were they blocked by costs and patronage? Papyri and tablets suggest they did. Petitions by humble hands, guardianships contested by women unafraid to write sharply, soldiers suing over kit and gifts. But there is regional variation. Egypt's paperwork abundance makes equality look common. Elsewhere, silence hides either peace or resignation. The safest claim is that Rome offered procedures widely and that access improved when a town had literate elites willing to broker it.by dusk. The magistrate sands the last tablet. The courtroom smells of cedar and arguments. You pass the edict board again. The ink is dry. A fly steps across. No beating debtors. Like a tiny senator testing limits. A scribe carries a bundle of rescripta to the archive, each tied with string and calm. You exhale with the city. Soldiers will need pay. Bridges will need stones. The post will need mules. But tonight the empire's boast is gentler. If you have a grievance and a sentence to carry it, you can find a door that opens to a table where someone writes an answer that becomes a rule. In a world that used to settle disputes with louder instruments, that is a lullaby. You turn a corner and walk into a sentence written in stone. Rome persuades by architecture the way lawyers persuade by clauses. The Forum of Augustus frames your stride with fluted arguments. The Temple of Mars altar rises like a footnote that keeps winning debates. The Era Paces hums under your fingertips. Lambs carved soft as breath. Vines that tangle into an essay on order. You've met law and logistics. Now you meet their PR department. Here, obedience doesn't bark. It smiles, measures, and invites you to feel virtuous about agreeing. Start with marble because it refuses to whisper. Augustus promised a temple to Mars the Avenger when he pledged vengeance for Caesar's murder. He built it into his new forum, walls hung with caryatids and semi-viri, statues of Rome's great men with short biographies beneath, a walkable curriculum for citizens who prefer heroes to footnotes. Down the hill, the Era Paces Augusti, altar of Augustan peace, celebrates peace not as nap but as policy. Processions of the imperial family glide across the frieze, children tugging at hems, senators properly grave, piety carved into cheeks. Mainstream fact: the Era Paces was voted in 13 BC, dedicated in 9 BC, and the residential gesti, the emperor's own "what I did" inscription, was set on bronze near his mausoleum and copied in Greek and Latin around the empire. The big survivor stands at Ankara. Marble here is autobiography that doesn't need a reader. It needs only a passerby. Coins carry the same sermon in your palm. A verse, the face you're supposed to remember. Reverse, a menu of virtues. PX with a branch, Fides with clasped hands, Annona with a modious and grained ship, Secretas lounging as if everything is fine because the mints say so. Titles become abbreviations that double as lullabies. IMP, Imperator, TRP, Tribunician Power, COS, Consul, PP, Pater Patri. When an heir is adopted, his portrait joins the party with hints, a star, a cornucopia, that tell markets and soldiers what the Senate will confirm next week. The denarius becomes a circular press release. The aureus, a gold rumor that always turns out to be true. Ritual knits all this into calendar. New Year's vows. Vota pro salute principis. Promise the emperor's safety on the Capitol while consuls' lictors gleam, and the smell of roasted sacrifice tells the city someone competent remembered the gods. Triumphs, when reserved for the emperor, scale glory to a single name. Ovations and triumphal ornaments allow others to shine without eclipsing the center. The pompa circenses, procession before games, parades images of gods and ancestors, then the emperor's family. Children cheer because the images are shiny. Magistrates cheer because the images are policy. Ceremony leaks into neighborhoods. Local councils build altars to Roma et Augustus and elect Severi Augustales, often wealthy freedmen, to run imperial cult festivals with wine, music, and a sturdy dose of civic theater. Provincial capitals crown priestesses who embody pietas. Inscriptions thank benefactors who paved the road to the new temple because piety travels better on stone. Inscriptions glow with formulae, Genio Augusti, Numini Augusti, language that locates loyalty in the emperor's spirit and makes honoring him sound like hygiene. Quirky tidbit: the Senate decreed the oak civic crown, Corona Civica, to hang above Augustus' doorway for saving citizens. Later houses imitated the decoration with a wink that said, "We too have saved at least a neighbor from a bad roof." Another, statue bases across the empire kept plug holes for changing names. When emperors fell out of favor, chisels turned Augustus into AV and left honest weather to finish the sentence. Listen to the ritual verbs you've learned. Adventus, the emperor's arrival in a city, greeted with speeches, sacrifices, and a carefully managed spontaneity. Allocutio, the set-piece address to troops, often commemorated in relief with a raised right hand and attentive helmets, an image that tells every garrison what authority looks like. Congiarium, cash and corn distributions, not bribery, heaven forbid, but generosity carefully timed to anniversaries, victories, or successful grain convoys, policy with porridge. Clausus Janus, doors of Janus shut to signal, no war. Augustus bragged he closed them 3 times. A headline stamped in coins, an argument sculpted in bronze. Light joke 1. A stonemason says the emperor found Rome brick and left it marble. His apprentice mutters, "And left us with sore backs," then carves laurel like a loyal back should. Light joke 2. A money changer claims he can smell PX on fresh silver. A veteran says he prefers the smell of donatives and is not picky about the icon. Light joke 3. During the Pampa, a boy asks why the emperor's statues never blink. His mother says because they have already agreed. Historians still argue whether provincial participation in the imperial cult was top-down choreography or bottom-up enthusiasm. Was worship of the emperor's genius imposed by edict, or a handy way for cities to flatter the power that paved their roads? Epigraphers point to crowdsourced generosity, councils voting funds, guilds endowing lamps, freedmen buying seats in the Augustales to advertise civic love and climb a ladder the Senate pretended was closed. Skeptics note the choreography. Governors preside, inscriptions copy formulas with suspicious exactness, and local enthusiasm tends to bloom when a new aqueduct needs imperial signatures. The debate ends where the festivals begin. Bands play, incense rises, and policy tastes like free bread. The visual script repeats until it becomes instinct. Victory, Nike/Victoria, perches on shields or drives a quadriga. Every arch freezes her mid-flight. The goddess Roma sits armored and serene on coin reverses as if to remind you that the city is a woman you do not interrupt. Personifications proliferate. Fortuna Redx for safe returns, Providentia for foresight, Equitas balancing scales that no one has ever seen topple on a coin. Under later emperors, radiate crowns signal, double, denominations, the Antoninianus, and sun god associations. Under the Flavians and Antonines, laurel wreaths and oak crowns map virtues to foreheads. Even milestones speak propaganda. IMP Caesar DDF, carved beside distances. Emperor Caesar, son of the deified Julius, so that travelers read monarchy as mileage. Mainstream fact again, clipboard straight. Augustus received the Clipius Virtutis, shield of virtue, voted by the Senate, honoring virtus, clementia, iustitia, pietas, courage, mercy, justice, piety, and posted it in the Curia. The Prima Porta statue, early 1st C, shows him in idealized cuirass with a cosmic tableau announcing the return of Roman standards from Parthia, myth and diplomacy welded into anatomy. Such images are not decorations. They are arguments rendered in calves and drapery. Ritual can discipline memory as well as mood. Funerals of emperors become apotheosis pageants. Wax effigies staged. Death, on the Palatine, a procession to the Campus Martius, a pyre, and, at least once, a released eagle to suggest a new star. Sidus Iulium taught the trick. Senate decrees of divus status for the dead emperor and temples for the new deity give successors an ancestor whose opinions are inconveniently permanent. Coins then show divs and an 8-pointed star. Urban altars learn a new name and a new day for incense. Quirky tidbit 2. Provincial stonecutters sometimes miscopy the imperial titulature. TRPXXV becomes TRPZiv, or carved a name that politics rendered obsolete before the dedication. Quick-thinking curators hammered triangles into extra verses and claimed it was an avant-garde flourish. Another, in some towns, children played at triumph, dragging a toy cart and chanting mangled abbreviations. The local schoolmaster called it civic education. The neighbors called it Tuesday. Even boredom is curated. Fasti, official calendars, paint red letters for festivals, list consuls, and embed imperial anniversaries like gentle barnacles. The evergreen imagery on coins makes change look like continuity. When policy shifts, the goddess stays. Price edicts post in forums with imperial busts at the top so arithmetic looks like loyalty. A new colony receives a kit, grid plan, forum, capitolium, and a statue base waiting for a portrait that will teach the town to stand for something. Historians still argue whether propaganda in Rome is persuasion in the modern sense or simply the architecture of inevitability. Does a coin change a mind, or does it train the hand to expect familiar faces? Does a procession convert, or does it console? The sensible answer is that images teach habits. Habits make consent comfortable. A citizen who flips a coin with px 1,000 times begins to measure peace by how well the silver rings. You spot the coordination between departments you've already met. The Irrationibus, finance, funds the festival. The Praefectus Anoni ensures the bread arrives on cue. The Praetorian prefect lines the route with plumes just far enough back to be decoration. The jurists draft the decree that thanks donors and standardizes the next celebration. The Senate votes the honor. The emperor declines the bigger title and accepts the smaller with a smile that says both were his to begin with. When it works, the city believes it is clapping for itself. Light joke 4. As soft as a laurel leaf, a veteran says the Arapaces shows peace with children. His wife says it shows peace with schedules. Light joke 5. A priest of the imperial cult claims the emperor's Newman cured his cough. The doctor says it was the honey wine. The priest says the honey obeys. Light joke 6. A sculptor brags he can make marble breathe. A tax collector says he prefers coins that do. By night the monuments glow the way embers do, quiet but busy. You pass the Arapaces again and think of our earlier equestrians counting grain, of our praetorians at their posts, of governors posting edicts. This is the front of house to their backstage. Propaganda here is not a lie, it is a selection of virtues to praise, of victories to remember, of rituals to repeat until they feel like weather. You exhale under a cornice that has taught a century to lift its chin. Tomorrow the mints will strike, the altars will smoke, the Senate will applaud, and a boy will trace IMP on a milestone with a grubby finger, sounding out power like a syllable he's almost learned. You step off the main avenue of titles into the shaded courtyards where influence pours tea. The men outside wear imperium-like armor. In here, power moves in silk, signatures, and seating charts. Imperial women do not command legions, officially. They choose who gets to wait in the antechamber, which sometimes amounts to the same thing. You learn quickly that the shortest path to a decision is often a doorway someone else opens. Start with names you can feel under your fingers. Livia Drusilla, Augustus' wife for 5 decades, later Augusta by senatorial decree, turns the palace into a school for patience. She cultivates client networks, fronts charities, stages reconciliations, and perfects the art of saying, perhaps, in a tone that means, "No, but I'll keep your petition from dying." When Augustus dies, 14c, she manages memory, doctors access, and learns how an emperor is turned into a god with housekeeping precision. Claudius will deify her formally in 42c. By then everyone has rehearsed acting as if she already lived above weather. Octavia, Augustus' sister, plays dynastic glue, married to Antony between truces, her dignified endurance becoming public pedagogy. Antonia Minor, their daughter, raises Germanicus and Claudius and runs a salon where soldiers' wives and senators' mothers pass news across embroidery frames. Later, Agrippina the Younger, Germanicus' daughter, Nero's mother, demonstrates that soft power can sharpen. She wins the title Augusta in her husband Claudius' lifetime, a rarity, sits with him in public as political punctuation, and maneuvers Nero's adoption and accession with a stage manager's calm. Plotina, Trajan's empress, is credited with guiding Hadrian's adoption in 117. Her letters speak the cool grammar of continuity. Julia Domna, Syrian-born wife of Septimius Severus, becomes Mater Castrorum, mother of the camps, accompanying campaigns, patronizing philosophers, hosting councils, and stitching civilian and military elites into the same cloak. Behind them stand Sabina, Faustina the elder and younger, Messalina, whose scandals remind you soft power can be noisy, Julia Misa, Julia Mamaea, an alphabet of agency cut into coin legends and temple pediments. Mainstream fact, neat as a hairpin, the honorific Augusta, first to Livia posthumously, later to women like Antonia Minor, Agrippina the Younger in 50c, Plotina, Sabina. Faustini, Julia Domna, formalizes prestige with priesthoods, public statues, and coin portraits. Imperial women sponsor and appear in the imperial cult, priestesses of Da Augusta, endow charities, and serve as patrons, patroni, of cities and guilds. Titles like Mater Castrorum, first to Faustina the Younger under Marcus Aurelius, also to Julia Domna, and Mater Senatus, Mater Patri in effusive inscriptions make maternal metaphor do constitutional work. Their faces on coins broadcast succession hints, mother beside son, wife beside heir, and their names appear in dedications across provinces where local elites learn to attach gratitude to a feminine genitive. You spend a morning following wool and whispers. Roman ideology likes its empresses, domestic, spinning at home, modest in jewels, pious at altars. Livia curated that ideal carefully, as did later Auguste. Public statues show long veils, serene brows, and hands poised for sacrifice or charity. But step behind the friezes and you find paper, intercessory letters for petitioners, margin notes on adoption drafts, suggested names for priesthoods, patronage lists for scholars and doctors, and attendance rosters for congiaria, cash distributions that ensure imperial generosity reaches neighborhoods with good memories. A kitchen staff list may decide a prefect's career. Who eats where and with whom is a budget line with lace. Quirky tidbit. Palace hairdressers, ornatrices, were minor diplomats with combs, carrying gossip between chambers while stacking the towering notice or melon styles you've seen on busts. An empress coiffure could start a provincial fashion and, with it, coin portraits that dated reigns more precisely than astrologers. Another. The palace had a linen room for dowries. Bundles catalogued like archives. Because arranging marriages for cousins, allies, and clients was soft power's calendar. The right necklace at the right dinner could move a frontier. Coins hummed the domestic chorus. Reverse legends read Pietas avgvsde. Iviano Regina attending the Empress. Concordia between imperial spouses. Facditas to advertise fertility when succession needs reassurance. When Faustina the Elder dies, 141 c. Antoninus Pius deifies her. A temple rises in the Forum. Coins show Eternitas holding a star. When Sabina, Hadrian's wife, is named Augusta, 128 c. Her portrait carries that refined, slightly distant gaze emperors prefer, a promise of continuity with good posture. Julia Domna's coins proclaim Mater Castrorum, Mater Patri in some exuberant inscriptions, teaching legions to accept maternal grammar in a military sentence. Light joke 1. A senator quips that the empire runs on diplomacy by dinner seating. An ornatrix replies that he should be nice to the person who sharpens the hairpins. Light joke 2. A provincial envoy begs an audience with the emperor. The chamberlain smiles and says he'll try the empress first. The shortest route between 2 points is a mother. Light joke 3. When an empress sends a petition back with, perhaps, a jurist translates. File under already decided, but let them feel heard. Historians still argue whether imperial women's power was substantive governance or curated influence safely fenced by etiquette. Some see Livia as co-architect of the early principate, her estates, clientele, and councils shaping personnel and policy. Others emphasize the limits, no formal magistracies, power contingent on male relatives' favor, propaganda insisting on domestic virtues to keep ambitions trimmed. Agrippina the Younger splits scholarship like a hare at the crown, mastermind or monster? Was Nero's accession her triumph, or the prelude to her scripted exit when a grown emperor wanted a clean desk? Plotinus' guiding hand in Hadrian's adoption, genuine agency or retrospective smoothing by Hadrian's court? Julia Domna's philosophical court, pluralist salon or branding for a soldier dynasty? The sources: Tacitus' suspicion, Suetonius' voyeurism, Dio's knowing sighs, require careful salt. Coins and inscriptions are steadier narrators. Soft power lives in priesthood and purse. Augusti often hold high religious offices. Livia is associated with the Vestals and the cult of Regina. Later women serve as sacerdotes Augusti with processions and stipends that turn piety into payroll. They endow alimenta, child support funds, and congeria for the poor, sponsor guild banquets, rebuild temples after fires, and underwrite aqueduct repairs that city councils cannot afford alone. A dedication from a Spanish town thanks an empress for restoring the baths and our hope. Civic prose that doubles as brand loyalty. In the camps, Mater Castrorum visits hospitals, funds shrines, and hands out donatives with a timing that smooths winters. Quirky tidbit 2, one rumor, unkind and surely embroidered, said Livia kept a gardener who specialized in figs and calendars. When Augustus died, a wag whispered about figs of the divine. More provably, Livia owned many estates. Their managers' careers rose with tides in the palace. Another, when Julia Mamaea, mother of Severus Alexander, attended the Senate, she sat behind a curtain and listened, etiquette obeyed, influence undiluted. Access is a policy. Palace doorways, admissions, are tiered, those who may kiss the hem, or not, those who may speak seated, those who may present a petition in a small room with lamps that make faces look forgiving. The Empress' apartments are a separate map. Her cubicularii and secretaries run a parallel post, petitions routed. Through the Augusta, bear a tone that governors learn to respect if they like sleep. You watch a widow kneel with a letter about her son's conscription. The Empress reads, marks a margin, and suddenly a prefect discovers discretion. No law changed, a life did. Light joke 4. A philosopher claims Julia Domna made him wiser with stipends. A soldier says she made him warmer with cloaks. The baker says she made him busier with festivals. Light joke 5. When a coin proclaims Concordia ab Storum, harmony of the rulers, a street poet asks if harmony is loud this year. The mint official reminds him to admire the engraving. Light joke 6. A chamberlain says the difference between a no and a not yet is whether the empress has eaten. Mainstream aside, sober as an inventory. Titles Augusta, Mater Castrorum. Deifications of Livia, 42c. Faustina the Elder, 141. Faustina the Younger, after 175. Plotina. Quiet cultic remembrance. Coin types with pietas, concordia, fecditas. Ivia Regina. Priesthoods of Da Augusta in provinces. Legal capacity rising in practice. Wealthy women as patroni of cities, litigating. Via guardians whose role often becomes formal. Imperial women's estates forming patronage networks that intersect with the fiscus and senatorial fortunes. Soft power can fail loudly. Messalina's scandalous appetites. Our sources love the genre, end in swift steel. Agrippina's attempt to co-rule with her son ends in a coastal villa with suspicious carpentry and a final interview. Julia Domna dies amid the Caracalan Severan storms that prove even maternal metaphors cannot quiet civil war. Yet even these endings teach bureaucrats to calibrate, praise early, chisel slowly, leave statue bases with swappable names. You end the day in the Forum of Peace, where a statue of an Augusta stands with veil and serenity. At her feet a small inscription thanks her for dowries to poor girls. Across town, a Legion shrine records a gift of standards ribbons. In the harbor, crates labeled. From the Augusta's estates, roll into a warehouse. The Senate will draft language calling her Mother of the Fatherland. The Emperor will smile and let the metaphor sit. The people will remember the bread on the right day and the rumor that she made two governors shake hands. You realize soft power in Rome is not secret, it is scented. It moves through festivals, coin reverses, petitions marked in a careful hand, marriages arranged like treaties, and the daily mercy of access. If the Principate's boast is that it made obedience feel like participation, imperial women did much of the feeling. The files call it intercession, the streets call it, "We got it done." You leave the palace corridors and step into a town hall where power wears local shoes. The basilica is bright with morning, sun angling through clear stories onto benches shiny from centuries of civic fidgeting. Here the empire runs on volunteers who can't resign, curiales, the city council class, men whose pride and property are drafted into public service the way soldiers' bodies are. If the emperor provides the weather and governors set the forecast, these people decide whether it rains on time. You watch them assemble. Duovieri, the two chief magistrates, aediles minding markets and sewers, quaestors with keys to the chest, and the broader council, the Ordo Decurianum, a few dozen or a couple hundred, depending on the city's ambition and patience. They wear good togas because respect is part of the budget, and they bring tablets with lists that look like prayers, roads to resurface, baths that need hotter water, a theater awning that embarrassed itself during last week's wind, and of course, the tax quota Rome expects with a smile that doesn't blink. They sit, cough, and begin the usual dance. Who will fund this? In 16 dialects of "not me," that eventually end in "we will." Mainstream fact, neat as a municipal charter, Flavian and later town laws, like the Brown's Lex Ernitana from Spain, spell out the machinery. Duovieri elected annually, aediles supervising markets and public works, quaestors handling funds, the Ordo maintaining a minimum property qualification, often 100,000 sesterces, and a fixed role. Curiales are responsible for munera, compulsory public services, including organizing grain distributions, staging games, maintaining roads and aqueducts, housing soldiers on the move, and crucially, guaranteeing the city's tax obligations. Failure isn't simply embarrassment. The councilors' private estates can be tapped to make up shortfalls. The empire lets cities keep their texture in exchange for results that arrive on schedule. You trail a day's docket. First, the market. Weights are tested on a bronze standard block, a little temple to fairness. A fishmonger whose scales mysteriously grew lighter overnight pays a fine and learns a new proverb about honest nets. Then streets. A contractor's bid for paving Via Laurentina with basalt. He promises a surface so smooth a senator's litter won't spill a complaint. Then water. Aediles propose a new lead pipe to the baths. A local family offers to pay for a statue if the inscription mentions them before Jupiter, compromise reached at. Same line, after the god. In the theater, an awning crew asks for better ropes. The council remembers last year's fiasco when half the town saw the afternoon sky as a metaphor. They approve rope. Euergetism slides across the floor like oil. A wealthy decurion, let's call him Crispus, rises with modest sighs and announces a gift. He will fund the new portico at the Forum, on condition the architrave records his name, his father's, his grandfather's, and a gratitude clause that might set records. Everyone pretends this is unexpected. Everyone knows he's been measuring since last winter. Civic generosity is the city's prestige economy. You spend to be remembered, to win office, to marry well, to make a governor right, noteworthy, in a margin that travels far. Statues bloom because reputation prefers bronze to rumor. Quirky tidbit, some councils kept a seat of shame. A low stool for members fined for skipping meetings or for failing to deliver on promised gifts. Sit there, and your toga creases remembered you with malice. Another, theater curtain boxes, pulvini, were assigned to magistrates by lottery at festivals. A clerk who, accidentally, misseated a rival's family found himself auditing amphora stamps for a year. Municipal revenge is rarely poetic. It is extraordinarily administrative. Between generosity and quotas lies the bargain that keeps Rome's peace local. The empire says, keep order, pay taxes, honor the emperor's genius, and we will leave you your customs, your council, your Latin, or Greek, your festivals, your right to sue a neighbor without asking a legionary's opinion. The city says, we will pave, police, pour, and praise, and we would appreciate a new aqueduct. When a governor rides into town, the Duovari meet him with speeches and a clean toga. When he leaves, the council hopes he spends the night elsewhere so billeting doesn't dent the budget. Autonomy is negotiated in receipts and inscriptions. Historians still argue whether curial service was noble duty embraced or fiscal burden endured. The High Empire's inscriptions read like love letters to public spirit, decurions funding temples, paving roads, seating gods and humans alike. By the 3rd century, however, sources complain of curiales fleeing to the army, the clergy, or imperial service to escape crushing obligations, particularly when tax quotas rose, inflation gnawed coin, and emergency requisitions turned occasional into always. Did the system sour, or are we hearing the loudest complaints from the worst decades? Archaeology shows continued benefactions even in rough times. The argument runs between marble and papyrus and refuses to declare a winner. Light joke 1. A Dover declares the city has no money but much gratitude. A contractor asks if gratitude can be melted and poured into road ruts. Light joke 2. A visiting reader insists a statue is the soul of public memory. A lamp maker mutters that his lamps prevent more stumbles. Light joke 3. A decurion vows to fund a new sundial. A neighbor requests one that keeps Roman time when clouds are Greek. You follow the money through back rooms. The city chest, Arca Publica, holds coins counted twice and weighed thrice. Seals of Duovari wax like the moon. Bequesters track rentals on public land, market stall fees, theater seating charges, and fines. They pay for repairs in nummies and labor in loaves, especially when prebitio, state grain issues, becomes municipal generosity during lean months. They also supervise alimenta, child support schemes funded by imperial or local endowments, interest from loans to landowners, bankrolls bred for registered children, the empire's attempt at social policy with a banker's logic. Cult binds town to throne. The Augustales, often wealthy freedmen, run festivals for Roma et Augustus, fund statues that shine like arguments after rain, and host dinners that stitch freed and freeborn into civic teams. Priestesses of the imperial cult process with veils and practical shoes. Their endowments sponsor oil for lamps and honey for cakes. A city that sings imperial hymns smoothly tends also to submit tax rolls smoothly. The correlation is hard to miss. Curio politics turn on seating and sons. A family with 3 generations in the ordo expects the 4th to carry the debt and the honor. A newcomer with fresh money buys his way onto the roll by paving a street and keeping his voice low. The property threshold makes virtue expensive. Fall below it, and the council may expel you with the regret of men who enjoy rules. Rise above it too quickly, and the aediles double-check your measures. patronage threads in from above. A senator in Rome or a governor in love with your town can slide a cousin onto the list, which costs you 3 benches and many muttered comments. Quirky tidbit 2. Municipal decrees occasionally include lines like, "And no one shall yawn while the Dover speaks." A joke scholar's suspect is either late graffiti or early wisdom. Another, some towns use painted announcement boards where scribes posted court days, market rules, and "Don't bathe your mule in the fountain" edicts. Small boys added fish drawings until an edile find fish. Disaster tests the gear teeth. Earthquakes crack arches. Fires lick roofs. Disease forces baths to empty and temples to fill. The council moves money from games to grain, appeals to the governor for remission of tribute, drafts a thank you to the emperor before the rescript arrives, just in case, and assigns watch rotations to guilds. Fullers by night, they are up anyway. Bakers by dawn, carpenters always. When the crisis passes, the city builds back with extra benches in the theater and a longer inscription, because memory wants an audience. Mainstream aside, written like a roster, Ordo Decurionum rules and charters such as the Lex Ernitana, Curio property qualification, compulsory munera, tax collection guarantees, public works, festivals, urgitism as social glue. Local courts under Doviri with appeal to governor, imperial alimenta programs under Trajan and successors, Augustalesh and imperial. Cult, billeting regulations, municipal archives, tabularia, storing minutes that would bore gods but delight historians. Historians still argue how Romanization traveled, by schools and theaters or by councils and tax ledgers. Did Latin spread because boys wanted to recite Virgil or because curiales kept minutes and contracts in Latin so governors wouldn't squint? Did cities become Roman because of baths and basilicas or because of budgets and benchmarks? The sensible answer is that culture likes plumbing. Roads brought law. Law brought contracts. Contracts brought Latin. Latin brought poets to quote under porticos you just paid to repair. At dust the council adjourns. A Dover signs 3 orders and a marriage contract for a pair of bakers who will never forgive him if the oven levy rises. Crispus wanders the forum sounding out where his architrave should go, somewhere very visible and not too close to the fish stalls. A boy traces the word ordo on the basilica step with a stick and asks his father if it means the important men. The father says it means the men who can't leave. You pass a milestone inscription naming the donors for the last paving, 4 curiales, 2 freedmen Augustalesh, 1 guild of mule drivers. The street under your sandals is civic grammar, subject, town, verbs, pave, pay, praise, object, all of you. You breathe in a city that governs itself under supervision and realize how much of the empire's day-to-day is municipal. The emperor's rescripts are weather. The governor's edict is forecast. The curiales decide whether roofs leak. They can be vain, stubborn, generous, broke, heroic, petty, and tireless, sometimes before lunch. But when the lamps are lit, and the baths steam and the theater's awning holds, you understand why Rome trusted towns. They turn obedience into pride and taxes into pavement. That, more than armies, is what your feet remember. You wake to an empire practicing its most delicate art, pretending tomorrow is already decided. Succession in Rome never becomes a single law you can frame. It is a choreography. Troops that acclaim, a senate that agrees, a city that applauds, and a palace that has practiced the seating chart for months. The mask is continuity. The hand underneath is improvisation with good paperwork. You watch the pieces warm up. The Praetorians polishing plumes, remember their weather-making, the Concilium drafting edicts in 2 languages, the Senate rehearsing gratitude, the mints readying dies with new abbreviations that somehow look ancient. Mainstream fact, steady as a milestone. There is no hereditary office. Emperor. Power clusters around Imperium Maius and Tribunicia Potestas, conferred and renewed. A common script forms, an heir is adopted, granted tribunician power and sometimes a share of Imperium. He appears as Caesar beside the reigning Augustus. Coins pair their portraits. They share consulships. The army hears an allocutio introducing tomorrow's voice. The Senate later ratifies titles. The Praetorians collect a donative. Provincial cities update altars. When the handover is planned, Nerva to Trajan, adoption, 97/98c, Trajan to Hadrian, adoption announced in 117, Hadrian to Antoninus Pius, 138, with Marcus Aurelius positioned afterward. The method looks like common sense done ceremonially. When it isn't, the calendar learns new verbs. Adoption is the empire's favorite engineering trick. It allows you to pick for competence rather than chromosomes while selling the choice as family. Trajan becomes Nerva Trianus. Hadrian styles himself Trianus Hadrianus. Antoninus Pius becomes the hinge that carries Marcus and Lucius Verus into the purple. The 2nd centuries. 5 good emperors are really 5 good adoptions, and the bureaucracy purrs because trained men inherit systems, not just thrones. You can feel the machine relax when a co-consulship pairs the old and the new. Tribunician years tick alongside each other on coin legends like twin metronomes. Light joke 1. A wag calls adoption biology with better odds. A jurist coughs and writes it down as ratio successionese. Light joke 2. A mint worker boasts he can carve a likeness faster than a Senate committee can say, place it. The committee asks for proof and receives a coin before dessert. Light joke 3. A Praetorian says he likes successors who have already promised pay. A pay clerk says he likes successors who can count. Blood still insists on speaking. Marcus Aurelius, philosopher and planner, does the Romanly un-Roman thing and names his son Commodus instead of adopting talent. The result reads like a cautionary inscription. The Praetorians grow rich. The Senate grows cautious, the coin grows lighter, and the city grows tired of watching a young man treat the empire like a stage. After Commodus' assassination at the turn of 192/193, the guard murders Pertinax over donatives and auctions the imperial purple on the rampart to Didius Julianus, inventing a kind of politics even cynics found tacky. The provinces revolt with taste. Septimius Severus marches, replaces the guard with his own, and founds a soldier dynasty where succession is theoretically blood and practically barracks. Ceremony tries to keep chaos polite. Adventus, the formal arrival of a new emperor, uses incense and rhetoric to tell a city that its new boss is old news. Voda are renewed in his name. The Senate issues a Lex de Imperio in the style of Vespasian's. A surviving inscriptions hint at formal powers. The army hears allocutio and sees the right hand raised at the right angle. Coins announce providentia, foresight, because nobody wants to stamp. Good luck. Damnatio memoriae, the erasure of a predecessor's name and face. Scrubs bases and chisels noses, teaching the public that memory can be managed like a ledger. You can still trace the plug holes where names used to be. Continuity is sometimes a stone with patched vowels. Historians still argue whether The Senate's ratification mattered or merely authenticated decisions made in camps. Optimists emphasized legality, no emperor without senatorial auctoritas, and the political theater that provinces recognized as legitimacy. Pessimists point to 41, 69, 193, Claudius found behind a curtain by Praetorians, Vespasian acclaimed on the Danube, Severus marching on a marketplace of purple. The likely answer is seasonal. In calm times, the Senate's handshake steadied the crown. In storms, the army's shout was the weather. Astrology and omens hum around the edges like street musicians you pretend not to hear but whose rhythm you walk to anyway. Augustus Capricorn swims on seals. Comets attend funerals. A lightning strike chooses a successor's portico. The haruspices cough on cue. Quirky tidbit. One emperor's birth horoscope was so widely copied that a nervous prefect confiscated star charts from bookshops for a week, proving that nothing fuels prophecy like a ban. Another, the formal adoption act could be staged with theatrical solemnity, witnesses, tablets, kisses, as if Jupiter himself kept the family register. The Praetorian prefecture becomes succession's fulcrum when emperors let it. Under Tiberius, Sejanus' overreach showed how a prefect can audition for the role he secures for someone else. Under Severus, the office bulks into a prime ministership. Under Caracalla and Elagabalus, it breaks and remakes careers. Under the good managers, it buffers the transition with pay, parade, and paperwork. Remember our earlier corridor of access? On the day a ruler dies, the prefect decides who gets through which door first. That decision can be worth a province, or a life. Light joke 4. A city crier rehearses the new emperor's full titulature and loses his place after the 5th TRP. A boy shouts, "Start again!" and the city applauds because laughter helps calendars. Light joke 5. A lawyer claims adoptio is superior to nature because it has witnesses. A midwife claims nature has better handwriting. Light joke 6. A senator insists the Senate chooses emperors. His wife asks whether the lion chooses the tamer. Crisis is what happens when none of the scripts land cleanly. The year of the 4 emperors, 69, taught that legions at the Rhine and Danube have opinions. The Severans taught that barracks can be nurseries. The 3rd century will teach that borders and thrones can tremble together. After Severus Alexander's murder, 235, soldiers begin promoting generals in situ. Emperors become meteors. Coin finest stumbles. Goths, Alemanni, and Persians test frontiers. Plague gnaws. The Senate claps wanly. The cursus publicus runs harder and brings worse news. Valerian is captured by Shapuri, 260, and becomes a cautionary relief on a Persian rock. Gallienus fights like a firefighter with too few buckets. Zenobia in Palmyra runs a breakaway solution that almost convinces the desert to be a sea. And yet, even here, the old mechanics persist in miniature. Acclamations are vouchered by letters to the Senate asking confirmation. Coins sprint to introduce the new face to markets. Provincial councils re-engrave altars. Praetorians keep postures until someone tells them to move. You watch governors quote last year's mandated to this year's emperor with a straight face, because habit is a form of courage. Quirky tidbit 2. Statue heads were stock sizes. Workshops kept shelves of neutral crania ready to be shaved, drilled, and fitted with the latest beard policy. Trajanic clean lines, Hadrianic curls, Antonine waves. In a crisis decade, the stonecutters earned hazard pay and speed. Another, Some towns quietly kept old portraits in back rooms, for repairs, until it was safe to reattach the famous nose. The Senate tries to matter by remembering how. It votes divus for the dead who deserve pantheons, refuses it to those who don't, and composes senatus consulta about succession etiquette that nobody reads while marching. It can still legitimize a winner and memorialize a loser. It can also die bravely. Stoic martyrs under Nero become footnotes with moral gravity, which later emperors read over breakfast and tried to avoid repeating. The army, for its part, becomes both suffrage and storm. Donatives announce legitimacy in silver. Promises about discharge bonuses, citizenship for auxiliaries, and land keeps spears amiable. But promises cost, and cost breeds corrosion. Historians still argue whether pay raises under Severus were wise realism, or the beginning of a fiscal slope that minted trouble faster than coins. The archaeology of hoards whispers answers. Buried savings left uncollected tell you where faith stopped. You feel why Diocletian will later decide to change the music rather than the tune. One man at the center cannot be everywhere, so he will propose for. One city cannot be the only court, so he will make more. One senate cannot certify the empire, so he will invent new legitimacies, robes, ceremonies. A crown you finally admit is a crown. But that is tomorrow's lesson. Tonight, the succession you watch completes politely. The new princeps appears on the balcony with the right boy, adopted, groomed, the right woman, Augusta beside him, the right prefect, visible, not looming. The Senate files in and emerges with relief arranged on faces like garlands. The Praetorians clap the exact number of times a manual specifies. The mints release silver with Pax AVGVSTI because hope loves old slogans. You recall our earlier coin with Providentia and smile at the confidence a die can teach. As lamps bloom along the forum. You pass an altar already updated with a new name and the same adjectives. A scribe is sanding a fresh tablet where TRP counts begin again. A boy practices the successor's name under the old one and looks pleased they rhyme. Succession in Rome is a braid of choice, chance, and ceremony. When it holds, the empire sleeps. When it frays, the empire improvises. Either way, somebody in the palace is drawing up a list for tomorrow's donative, because rhythms calm even ambition. You wake to a Rome that has decided ceremony should admit what power already knew. The old fiction, first citizen among equals, tightens its belt and steps behind a curtain. When it reappears, it prefers to be called Dominus Noster, our Lord, and it wears a diadem that doesn't pretend to be a laurel. You feel the air change in small courtesies. Officials bow lower. Doors open onto rooms with gold-threaded curtains. The emperor is now a horizon rather than a neighbor. The empire has not become alien overnight. It has recognized that a single center cannot police 3 continents by winking like a republican. It needs more centers and sterner grammar. You begin with Diocletian, R. 284 to 305, the administrator who thinks like a surveyor. He looks at the map and sees a management problem. Too much frontier, too little calendar. So he multiplies emperors, first a co-Augustus, Maximian, then 2 junior Caesars, Galerius, Constantius, in 293, the Tetrarchy. Portraits on coin reverses pair like dance cards. Inscriptions split victories and vows. Capitals proliferate to where trouble actually lives. Nicomedia in the east, Milan in Italy, Trier at the Rhine. Mainstream fact: the Tetrarchy is formal by 293. Diocletian issues an empire-wide price edict in 301. He retires voluntarily in 305 to a palace at Salona, Split, something no earlier emperor dared. The experiment won't outlive its founders peacefully, but the administrative muscles it builds never fully relax. The provincial map is redrawn the way you redraw a stubborn sentence: shorter clauses, clearer subjects. Large provinces are split into many smaller ones, roughly double ing or tripling the count, and grouped under dioceses overseen by vicarii. Above them, praetorian prefects retool from palace generals into super-governors of entire regional clusters. The old Praetorian Guard, which once made and unmade emperors, loses the plot. Constantine will dissolve it after the Milvian Bridge, 312, and their camp becomes urban real estate. Civil and military careers are separated on paper so governors judge and tax while duces and comites fight. Later, mobile field armies, comitatances, complement frontier troops, limitanii, a distinction that will harden under Constantine. You realize the empire has learned a corporate trick. Don't let the same person hold the purse and the sword. The bureaucracy thickens, but it also becomes readable. Offices proliferate with titles that sound like tables of contents. Magister officiorum, Master of Offices, wrangles palace departments, couriers, agents in rebus, arsenals, and sometimes diplomacy. Cum sacrarum largitionum, Count of the Sacred Largesses, runs taxation, mints, and customs. The public money. Comes rerum privatarum manages the emperor's private estates. The private money. Questor Sacri Palatii becomes the law drafter-in-chief, turning imperial moods into edicts with full paragraphs and fewer regrets. Later handbooks like the Notitia Dignitatum will list these dignities with insignia, a visual index of a government that now wears badges on purpose. Quirky tidbit: purple shoes, reserved for the emperor, leave a dye trail made of crushed murex shells. Courtiers learn that the fastest way to lose a career is to, accidentally, match the hue. Another, Diocletian's retirement palace at Salona is part villa, part fortress. Local legend will insist he grew cabbages there and refused to return when invited, administration's patron saint of out of office. A third, the Notitia illustrates offices with emblems. A purse for finance, a spear bundle for military, so even hurried readers can tell which door to fear. Money gets surgery. Coin fineness had slid during the 3rd century crises. Diocletian reforms the system. The aureus as high gold, a fine silver argentius, a large bronze silver wash coin, the phallus, and tiers beneath. Then comes the famous Edict on Maximum Prices, 301, carved on stone from Phrygia to North Africa, trying to cap prices and wages for everything from wool and boots to lions. Yes, there's a lion for beasts. Mainstream fact: the edict survives in fragments. It aimed to quell inflation and profiteering but proved hard to enforce. Markets prefer incentives to chisels. Constantine will later steady the currency with the solidus, from c. 312 to 324, a reliable gold piece that merchants will trust for centuries, long after emperors' names blur. Taxes learn new arithmetic, capitatio iugatio, a combined assessment counting land units, yuga, and persons/animals, capita, ties levy to what a district can plausibly produce. Fiscal years and census cycles anchor expectations. Grain in kind, annona, supports armies that move like thunderstorms toward real trouble. The result tastes bureaucratic but survivable. Predictable requisitions, registers that can be appealed, and a parchment ecosystem that lets a farmer in Africa argue with a number in Milan. Light joke 1. A clerk explains capitatio means by heads. A muleteer asks whether mules have heads. The clerk replies, only when pulling taxes. Court life becomes theater with assigned seats. The emperor, whether Diocletian or later Constantine, sits under a canopy. Audiences, admissions are graded. Proskynesis, prostration, or deep bowing becomes ritualized homage. Access is currency stamped by chamberlains, cubicularii. The Senate in Rome still exists and will gain a sibling in Constantinople, but its political teeth are carefully filed. It confers honors, tends memory, and drafts letters that know their place. Where earlier emperors performed modesty, the dominate performs distance, a policy choice to protect the person who must be, increasingly, everywhere by letter. Mainstream fact again, Constantine defeats Maxentius at the Milvian Bridge, 312, issues the Edict of Milan with Licinius, 313, granting religious toleration, builds a new capital at Constantinople dedicated in 330, and reorganizes the army and court around a peripatetic center. The Praetorian Guard is abolished. Palace Guard units, Scoli Palatini, take over. Comital titles. Count comes, multiplied to denote proximity as rank, comes domesticorum, comes re militaris. Imperial law, now openly the source rather than the interpreter of norms, accumulates in codices. The Codex Gregorianus and Hermogeneanus, late 3 RD, early 4th C. Collect rescripts. Theodosius II's Codex Theodosianus, 438, will publish a curated library of constitutions since Constantine, a bureaucrat's bookshelf turned into empire-wide gospel. Later, Justinian, 6c, will compile the Corpus Juris Civilis, but that is another evening's lullaby. Historians still argue whether the shift from principate to dominate was a rupture, an Oriental despotism, imposed on a free-speaking West, or a continuity wearing more honest clothes. One camp stresses Diocletian's robes, proskynesis, and heavy bureaucracy as cultural importations from Eastern courts. Another notes that the Republic had long been theater, that Augustus already centralized silently, and that crisis simply stripped euphemism. They debate fiscal burden. Did reforms crush curiales under quotas, prompting flight into the army and clergy, or did they stabilize states that had nearly flown apart? Archaeology supplies stubborn counterpoints. City councils still pave streets and endow baths in the 4th century. Inscriptions still thank donors with cheerful lies. The picture is mosaic, not manifesto. Quirky tidbit, the agents in rebus, imperial couriers and inspectors, became the empire's rumor catchers. A nervous governor treated their arrival like a pop quiz. Another, ceremonial footwear had its own etiquette. Stepping too close to the imperial carpet without the right soles could end a decade of patient bowing. A final, Constantine's new city inherited Rome's street games. Children there learned to chant consuls' names even when few adults could remember what consuls now did. Law continues its domestication of power. The Questor Sacri Palatii drafts constitutions that read like policy memos with teeth. Bishops, new characters in state theater, petition emperors for clemency and sometimes get it. Councils like Nicaea, 325, gather under imperial umbrellas, their canons escorted by eunuchs and echoing in provincial courts where theology and property meet. Appeals flow to emperors by habit. Rescripts now carry Christograms or crosses in headers. Scribes keep the same fast hands and new salutations. Light joke 2. A notary adds a cross to the margin and claims the file weighs less. The archivist says piety is good but shelves still bend. Cities remain the gears, but the gear ratio changes. Curiales are tied more tightly to their benches. Laws forbid them from escaping into the army or monastic life without compensations. Municipal munera become less festive as annona quotas and repair schedules grow teeth. Yet urban life refuses to retire. Circus factions chant bad steam, guilds bicker about seats at festivals, and city councils still find money for awnings. The dominate's success, when it succeeds, is not in suppressing the old but in enveloping it with timetables and titles that make improvisation unnecessary on good days and survivable on bad ones. Army life splits into two tempos. Frontier limitanii farm and guard, a living hedge against raids. Mobile comitatances, and elite scoli, move with emperors, punching where needed. Pay comes partly in kind, partly in coin that has relearned reliability. Recruitment broadens. Officers' titles ladder up to magistri militum who will later overshadow civil officials. The separation of military and civil chains is principle, not always practice. In emergencies, necessity introduces them to each other with a firm handshake and an IOU. Light joke 3. A limitanius says he measures time in harvests. A comitatensis says he measures it in emperors' birthdays. A taxman says both measure it in receipts. Propaganda adapts without blinking. Coins crown emperors wearing diadems. Reverses show restitter orbis, verbs exerciti, secretas riep blici. Arches still rise. Price edicts go on stone. Law codes go in book chests. Adventist rituals now feature jeweled shoes. When Constantine dedicates Constantinople, he installs a porphyry column that will watch centuries of processions. When Theodosius processes through the hippodrome, the factions shout doctrine alongside devotion, and the emperor learns to read the city's voice before issuing edicts. The theater is bigger, the script supervisor, stricter. By night you look back and see the long line. The Principate taught Rome to obey rules written as courtesy. The Dominate taught it to obey rules written as rules. Both depended on habit, roads, and paydays. Both used law as memory. Both discovered that a state is only as strong as the appointment book of its couriers. The difference is tone. Where Augustus whispered, participation, Diocletian and Constantine state, order, and the empire, tired of crisis, agrees to the trade. You walk past a milestone that now names emperors with diadems and prefects with bigger territories, past a customs post with a tariff board that hasn't changed its handwriting, past a basilica where a quaestor drafts a constitution that will live longer than frescoes. The machine hums in a lower key, heavier but steadier. Whatever you call it, dominate, late empire, administrative honesty, it is still Rome, roads, receipts, rituals, and a calendar that wants you to sleep because tomorrow's courier has a schedule.